It's clear that the Zionists aren't the top dog. But who is? That's the mystery. Who is the man behind the curtain, or the architect? The biggest one is information war, psychological operations, right? And information war, right? And so that's the biggest one. And to understand that, you need to understand things like this. So you're going to have to spend a lot of time looking at intoxicants. You're going to have to spend a lot of time. And I don't mean 2 months. I'm talking about strategic. You need to be looking at this year after year after year. Not always focused on it, but studying that, studying psyop, studying music. You need to study these different anthropological warfare, demographic warfare, financial warfare.
Hey, welcome back. And joining us today is returning guest Michael Yon. Michael, how you been?
Good morning. Sunshine. You see, the sunshine is up here in Japan. I'm not too far from Mount Fuji, the illustrious stratovolcano, which last erupted in 1707 and really wiped out a lot. When it does it again, it's probably going to take out, well, let's see what it does. It may take out Tokyo, which will be a world event, obviously. The Japanese government's been warning more and more about it. Actually, I was talking the other night, Masako and I were on the phone with somebody, and we were making a video for somebody, and everything started shaking here. There was a earthquake. Yeah, we feel them here pretty often. Well, it's Japan. I mean, this is Earthquakeville, and it's got a lot of volcanic activity. But when there's been people that have lived around Mount Fuji, which you can see from here. It's small in the distance, but people have lived around Mount Fuji for about 10,000 years. And so there are some areas that are actually safe, and other areas you're just going to die. Pompeii style, right? Because of prevailing winds and that sort of thing. And unfortunately, Tokyo is right downrange from those prevailing winds. So, those things can pump up a lot of ash. A lot of famines actually start from volcanoes. They pump up. So those are like light switch famines. In other words, everything's going fine and boom, bunch of ash in the sky and you're in a famine. So it's like that, right? And but then there's other famines that kind of fade in and fade out. There's been a lot of famines in Japan, and often related to volcanic activity around the world. If you live near a volcano, you're not ever very far from famine. But you look at, in the early 1800s, there was was it Tambora, a volcano? I read a book on that years ago. It was The Year Without a Summer. It's called The Year Without a Summer. And that volcano erupted, what was it, 1816? And that volcano, something like that. And I should know, I read a book on it. It's been a while, but that volcano erupted, and it was so big, it reduced the available sunlight apparently across the world, and reduced crops across the world. Even though that was over in the Indonesia area, it reduced crops across America, like in places like Vermont, and across Europe. And interestingly, the artists were so serious back then. I read one account of it that you could tell the artists around the world, they're painting their sunlight, their scenes that have sunsets or the sun in the scenes. They all had, or I don't know if they all, but many had changed the hue of their paintings. Like in Europe or whatever, they actually, you could see in the the renditions, or let's say the reflections through the paintings of those times, because there was no photography back then, and but you could see in their paintings that they were painting with different color orange for the sunrise sunsets. It's fascinating, isn't it? I don't know about the truth in that. I read that in a book, and so I didn't deep dive to see if the author, if they could withstand the scratch test. One of the things that's helpful though about just traveling a lot and reading just so many different things is, when you're trying to figure out what's accurate and what's not, which is our daily lives. Everybody lives through this every single day. You know what I mean? Like, what's accurate and what's not. And, often it can have significant consequences, like, dying, or, thriving versus not thriving, or just dying, like taking the wrong jab or taking any jab, right? And so we constantly have to make these decisions. And I've noticed one thing, as you get older and you get more and more experiences that accrue, and you have more time to study more and more subjects, you're able to do the scratch test much quicker and much more accurate. In other words, what you're immediately looking for is there anything that makes that statement false? from my experience, right? Somebody will make a statement like, for instance, all wars are bankers' wars. So that one doesn't pass the scratch test with me even 5 seconds. I know that's not true. I just know it's not true because I've seen too many things and studied too many things. I just know that to be false. Now, there were many wars before banks existed. They just didn't exist, right? Or I'm out with the Emberá and the Kuna Indians in the Darien Gap. Those guys have been at war with each other many times. They don't have banks out there. And there was nobody involved from the outside. I mean, they had wars before the Spanish ever showed up, right? It wasn't about banks. It was about who's controlling this river and that sort of thing, right? And they went genocide against each other. Both tribes are still there. I go out with both of them, and they both still remember it quite well the last time they went for the genocidal war against each other. What I'm getting to is many of these things, if you can find one thing that's false with it, that's definitely false, then it's falsus in uno, falsus in omnibus, which I guess the British don't like that in their old court system, but Americans still do it. When false in one thing, false in all things, which is sometimes that when people make a statement, all wars are bankers' wars, and I go false. It's just not true. I can. These books are filled with wars that there was no banks involved, and further, the people that are really at the top that are operating these banks, they don't need money. They got the printing machine. They don't. They want much bigger things than money. You and I were talking about this before you hit record. I mean, we're talking about people that want to accrue. They want to take the whole world. People are saying, why would the people that have these big companies want to kill off their customers? I'm like, what, are you kidding? These people don't want you as a customer. They want your ranch. They want your jet. They want your country. They want Ireland. They want Europe. They don't want a 10,000 acre parcel. To them, that's a postage stamp, right? They don't want a 100,000 acre parcel. That's a postage stamp. They want all of Texas. They want all of the United States. They want the whole continent. They want the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, right? And space and the moon, right? They want to live forever. One of the things that's interesting, though, is we look at these super duper ultra powerful people, and if you notice, they get old or age at the same rate that we do, right? If they're that powerful, at least the ones that we see, why haven't they mastered aging, which they always seem to be looking for, right? The fountain of youth and all these different things. They haven't found it. I mean, Bill Gates and all his billions and all these Trump, all the top Zionists that we see anyway, they're getting old at the same rate, right? So where's your magic? Where's your magic? I mean, you don't have the power over life and death. You're just making this stuff up around your little rituals in a basement somewhere, probably, torturing children or something, right? These are savages. They're living in old savage ways, but they have over time accrued great power because there are ways to accrue power, and there are experts. I mean, their accrual of power is it's an art form. It's an art and a science, and they have gotten better and better at it over time. And of course, the oligarchs fight each other. But again, has anybody seen somebody that apparently is like 400 years old or 700 years old, or you know what I mean? If somebody has that magic, they're not talking about it. But look at the people that we do see in front of us that are billionaires and that sort of thing, or maybe trillionaires, and they run entire countries. Putin's not, he's not going backwards in age. Xi's not going backwards in age. They can make all those drones and go to war like crazy. Trump's not. Netanyahu's not. None of these guys are. None of the shamans out there doing their mushrooms or whatever they're doing, ayahuasca, all these different things that people do, doing the everything under the sun they've looked for I don't know, thousands of years probably. Where is it?
The fountain of youth. Yep.
Where is it? Where is it? You know what I mean? They're not. They're desperate to get something, and they're not. They invariably seem unhappy. Then which is weird because I'm happier now than I've ever been in my whole life, and you know what I mean. I've been happy, and I've been generally a happy person with rough times when I was young. Mother died and things like that. It was very rough. And there's been, everybody's had rough times. Smooth seas never made us a successful sailor. I mean, I didn't do those years in combat and come back not stressed out and not a drug addict because I'm weak, right? I could go through things that stressed out other people and it broke them, right? I could not have done that had I not been through a lot of stress when I was younger. I've been there, I've done that, and I can do a lot of combat and come back and not be crazy, right? But what I'm getting to is it doesn't. These ideas that they seem to be looking for something they have never achieved. They seem organically unhappy, or they're just unhappy people. I mean, just filled with rage and anger constantly, right? And just doing genocide sometimes for sport. You can see how some of these people celebrate the things that they do, celebrating like Gaza. I mean, they celebrate those sorts of things, right? That's not the only genocide in the world. Nobody knows how many genocides there's been in the world, and many of are not in any record books. When I'm out with the Kuna and the Emberá Indians in Darien, they'll tell you about their genocides against each other. And I haven't seen any movies about that. That's just, most people would never know unless you're out in the jungle with them, right? They'll tell you stories. It's just, these are ephemera that are lost to time, different languages. Nobody even knows where the Emberá come from. I asked the Emberá, I'm out with Emberá all the time. They message me all the time. The chief down there of 28 villages, he messaged me. He's on WhatsApp. We met, and we took him up to Washington, D.C. and introduced him to a bunch of congressmen. And in fact, he stayed with one of my Green Beret old teammates at his house. We took him shooting and ate bear and stuff like that, right? And he's an Embra, man. He's from the jungle. We had him, but when we had him up in Washington D.C., and he went to school in Oregon, so his English is good. But he went to school in Oregon, and they look at the Darien Gap as if this is a horrible place and nobody wants to live there. When we had Francisco, is his name, Agape, when we had him up in Washington, he's like, I said, do you want to go stay here a little while longer? We'll take you out and do some other. He's like, no, I must go back to Darien, He and I said, why did you, when you went to Oregon for school, why did you come back to Darien? He goes, this is my home. He loves Darien. And those kids out there, the place that we look at is like this dark, dangerous, it is kind of dangerous, but the people are happy. They're so happy. Like, you go out to these villages, and I've been out to dozens of their villages way out in the jungle, and the kids are so happy. They're rolling in the mud. I've told you this before. They roll in the mud, jump in the river, and climb the tree, waving it. They're in really huge trees out there, man. So if an American mother saw her children in trees that high hanging on by one arm, seriously, she'd have a heart attack. The fireman would say, we don't have a ladder that can go up there. We're going to have to use a helicopter. It's like the kids are just up there shooting their bows and arrows out of the trees and stuff. I mean, they're so happy. I was talking yesterday with Al Johnson. He's got a Substack. You would want to interview Al. We've been all over the place. We've been to Malaysia together, Indonesia, Thailand, Japan, Panama. I took him out to the Darien Gap. He's a former EOD officer, right? But he's also a serious academic. And so we were talking about that because I took him deep out into the Darien too. I said, watch these kids. They'll be rolling in the mud. They love to roll in the mud and jump in the river. Roll in the mud, jump in the river. And sometimes all you see is their teeth smiling and they're waving at you because they're covered in mud. And they're very clean people. They just jump in the river all the time. And what we were talking about is how so many Western children are drugged up. Oh, Johnny's got too much energy. He won't sit still. I've been in their schools and many of the Emberá Indian schools, and the kids are well behaved. Listen, if the kids got too much energy, hey, go swim in the river and come back in about 30 minutes. You know what I mean? That's how you handle it. If Johnny can't sit still, he doesn't need a pill. The teacher just needs to say, hey, Johnny, hit the road, go out with PE class, Coach Smith will be waiting on you. You know what I mean? If you didn't get enough PE, go get some more and then come back when you're ready. You know what I mean? That's the way to handle this stuff. Some kids just have different energy levels. They don't need a pill. They need to go run around. I used to babysit this guy. He ended up he was, well, when he was about 10 or 11 or so, and my sister couldn't quite handle him, right? And I'd just gotten out of the Army. I was like, give me that boy, I'll take him. So and I mean, she loved him, but he ended up getting his PhD at MIT. Actually, he gave me a tour up there of all the labs at one point later, when he's getting his PhD. Well, now he's got it. And yeah, but the point is I'm like, this kid's got a lot of energy. This is great. I would keep in mind, I just got out of the Army. I was a young Green Beret. I was super ultra fit. You know what I mean? I was a physical guy, and I know how to deal with this. I took a Frisbee and I was just like, fetch, boy, fetch, fetch, boy. I just ran him down till he was in the dirt. Get up, fetch. He would just be worn out and he couldn't. And then he was calm. He was good to go. And then we'd play chess and that sort of thing. He was a good chess player. But that's all you need to do. Wear him out, man. If you got a high energy child, that's a gift from God. That doesn't, but you look at the stuff from the 1800s, right? I got a lot of it here. And I'll have to show you some other time so that I can lay it out first. But they were giving kids, they called it like mother's friend, laudanum, right? With Miss Winslow's, it's called Miss Winslow's syrup, I think. That was just one. I mean, they were giving kids morphine. They were giving them cocaine. Or the Pope was shilling this thing called Vin Mariani. It was invented in 1860, I think, Vin Mariani. I got one of the bottles. I got one of the original Vin Mariani bottles, right? It was cocaine Bordeaux, cocaine wine. The Pope was totally down on it, drunk, I guess, and high on cocaine all the time. And he was publicly shilling this stuff. He was publicly like, this is the best stuff. You can look up, the Pope and Vin Mariani. And they also called it coca wine, right? So anyway, I've got a bunch of old ephemera, which is old from the 1800s, and people are giving this wine with cocaine to children, like in bottles and stuff. These are real. These aren't copies. These aren't reprints. This is real. They were, when the mothers were in their factories, and they couldn't, mothers had to take their children to the factories. They would give them laudanum. You give them morphine, cocaine. I'm not sure if the cocaine would work on them, but they would, but they were giving them, you wouldn't believe the concoctions. And then, so Vin Mariani was very, cocaine wine, or coca wine, they call it coca wine, this was a period when they were coming up with a lot of this stuff. And this is also the period where, where's my book? I had it, oh, here it is. Actually, I was just looking at it. The Seven Sisters of Sleep. This book came out in 1860. I've been trying to get an original of it. But I just bought this one. And so this one is a book, The Seven Sisters. This came out in 1860, right? And 1860, right? And anyway, this book, or this is a reprint of 1989, but this book talks about the Seven Sisters, which would be like opium, fly agaric mushrooms, the Alice in Wonderland mushrooms, and the Super Mario, this fly agaric mushroom. You see that everywhere, fly agaric, right? You'll see, once you're tuned in and you know what fly agaric looks like, you're going to see it all over the place, right? You'll see it everywhere. It's you grew up seeing this. Do you know what I'm talking about? Fly agaric, the red. See, you know what I'm talking about, but a lot of people
Red and
don't.
white.
But
Red and white.
Yep, that's right, with the red. So like when the caterpillar's up smoking his hookah sitting on top of a fly agaric mushroom, and he's talking to Cinderella. He's blowing smoke rings. I mean, what was in there? So the Seven Sisters are opium, fly agaric, cannabis, betel nut, which is, I've seen a lot of betel nut used in Bangladesh and India and Nepal. It's like, you know what betel nut is? It's actually like an amphetamine, and it's thick over there. Like they'll spit it everywhere, and it looks blood red when they spit it out. So I remember I went into this one museum in India, and they literally were people spitting that crap in the corner. They always spit in the corners, right? And so it looks like people get slaughtered in the corners or something. It looks like you've had a firefight out because there's these red spit marks everywhere, right? And so, I mean, just unbelievable. And so betel nut, right? Another one is datura. datura, which is datura is stuff that like the Thugis and others use to poison people, right? And that grows probably not far from you, wherever you're at in America. That stuff grows around America, datura. So datura is one of the seven. These are the basically the main drugs used, right? So it would be cannabis, opium, datura, betel nut. I know them all, but they're not coming to my mind. But in any case, when I started going through this book, I'm like, I wonder if Cinderella and all those books, tobacco is one of them, and those books that came out after this were actually inspired by this, because this was a bestseller in the 1800s. It was a huge seller, this book, The Seven Sisters of Sleep, right? And it goes through in detail all these different drugs, right? And so, and then you look at Cinderella, you look at Pinocchio. Pinocchio is, a bunch of alcohol, tobacco, basically. They're missing the firearms part. But I mean, and, it's got like the Epstein Island stuff going on in Pinocchio too. And all these books came out at similar times. Narnia, a friend just mentioned to me last night, Narnia. And I remember a lady who helped raise me and my sister and brother after my mother died. She used to read the Narnia stuff to us. And I just remembered that last night when one of my friends told me about Narnia. I'm like, oh, the Witch, the Wardrobe, and all that stuff. So I started looking it up at like 3 a.m. today. And I'm like, yeah, it's true. I mean, I was hearing those stories when I was a kid, right? And so we all have been exposed to this a lot. Disney World making all these things. But many of these old super classic books are based on stuff like that. They're based on all this, Pinocchio, one of the most famous ever and most hyper. I cut his strings off. And one of the most hyper analyzed books ever is Pinocchio. It's actually one of the best sellers of all time, Pinocchio, right? But so, and then I found in the forward in this one, they had the same theory, actually. Because this was republished in 1989. This was a 1989 one. And it says, we must mention our suspicion of a close connection between the Seven Sisters of Sleep from 1860, that's this one, and Lewis Carroll's, his name was Charles Ludwig Dodgson, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, 1865. So 5 years after that, after this, Alice in Wonderland comes out. Anyway, it goes on. And so, it talks about the Seven Sisters, which is this book, and it goes on and on. And so, so that mushroom is Amanita muscaria, but it's also called fly agaric, right? Isn't that wild? I mean, these things are. But what I'm getting to is, if you look in the 1800s, and you look at so many of these syrups, I mean, so many cough gummies and all this stuff they had back then, gummies and whatnot. In fact, I'm just about to buy an old lozenge bottle that was used with Mother's Helper, actually Mother's Friend, right? You can buy some of these things on eBay, right? And so, it's amazing, the stuff that would have been lost to history. You can now go, oh, collect this stuff, right? And but you can see, like Vin Mariani that I was talking about earlier, that the Pope and so many other people were drinking. I've even bought prescriptions of people that were prescribed that. And by the way, a lot of these things that were popular back then, these cocaine drinks and all this stuff, and morphine and laudanum and all these things, heroin, aspirin, they were all, and almost inevitably they were designed by a pharmacist, right? Because people trusted the pharmacist. Now keep in mind, pharmacists back then weren't just filling prescriptions; they were mixing the stuff, right? They were mixing. They had the mortar and pestle. There's still some pharmacists that do that in different parts of the world. I mean, you go through and you got a prescription or whatever, and the pharmacist mixes your stuff up, and they're pounding it and whatever, and making tinctures and all this stuff. So they're like chemists, actually, right? So they call them, I got to go to the chemist, right? That sort of thing. So the pharmacists were, they're wearing the white coats. I mean, they're highly respected, right? So you'll see like these different potions, we might call them, where often you'll see that the founder is like Dr. Pepper. They'll either be a doctor or a pharmacist. Coca-Cola was a pharmacist, right? So the Vin Mariani was super famous for a while. It was worldwide famous. So famous you can still get bottles of it, not bottles of it, but empty bottles Maybe there's bottles of it out there that would be super expensive, I'm sure, but you can buy those cheaply. That's how many there were, right? You can still buy them cheaply, and so I mean, cheaply might be $300 or $400 or $500, but I mean, it's not like $50,000. There's five out there or something. There's a lot. Well, landfills are filled with them, But so then Coca-Cola comes along. That's the replacement. Where did Coca-Cola get its name? Cocaine and cola. Cola is a nut spelled with a K from Africa, and it has caffeine in it, right? So Coca-Cola was basically riding on the coattails of Vin Mariani, right? The coca wine, right? So Coca-Cola comes up, pharmacist, of course, and starts to, and so you could get these things in the pharmacy. That's where people used to go get their soft drinks, was the pharmacy, because the pharmacies like Pepsi came out after that, also in that time period. But after that, Pepsi Cola. Pepsi also had the cola nut, right? Cola spelled with a K, but Pepsi had pepsin in it for digestion, they said, right? And Dr. Pepper had some secret ingredients, but they said it was all natural. I don't know what's the truth. Cocaine is all natural. Heroin is all natural. All these things, they are all, Datura is all natural. They're all, Datura, you can go, it might be growing in your yard. You don't even know what it is, right? I mean, fly agaric is, the Amanita muscaria, that the mushroom is all natural. So all natural that doesn't mean anything. That means zero, and so this idea that, hey, it says it's natural. And so what? Rattlesnake venom's natural, right? And it doesn't matter. Arsenic. And so, but the point is they, the Coca-Cola comes along, and the cola nut is spelled with a K. And so in doing the marketing, they changed it to a C because it has a better look to it. Coca-Cola. So it's cocaine, or derivatives of the coca leaf, and cola with a K, but they changed it to a C. So that became super popular and sort of edged out and muscled out and took the place of Vin Mariani. But the Pope was swilling Vin Mariani, and he was shilling it publicly. And, it was well known that, and so finally Coca-Cola, gets to be big time, and Pepsi and these others, and Dr. Pepper and all these, they all came from that time period. It's quite fascinating. And finally, people start to realize, hey, this cocaine stuff, which had a multi-generation run of, hey, this is the greatest stuff ever, and the morphine and all this stuff. They were given laudanum, which is highly, highly addictive. They were giving that to children for teething, right? Oh, your child's crying. Oh, it's because its teeth hurt. So of course they're going to say its teeth hurt, right? So give him this morphine, give him this laudanum, give him this cocaine cola or whatever, or wine, literally Vin Mariani, drugging up the kids en masse. So this idea that now we drug up kids, they did it back then too. But then we start to see certainly by 1913, people are like, they were done with this. They were like, you got to get this. So then you start seeing bottles that say no dope and things like that. And by the way, dope. And whenever I bring up dope, the actual dope heads that don't know anything today, they're like, you don't know anything about dope, man. You don't even know what dope is. You think that's dope? No, this is dope. Those are dopes, right? They don't know what dope is. Dope is so many different things. When you look at the old Appalachian people that are probably, I mean, I used to live out in Appalachia for 2 years. There's old timers that still call Coca-Cola dope. Still, there probably still are. Maybe go out to Robbinsville, North Carolina, or Andrews, North Carolina, or Murphy, North Carolina, in that area. Certainly, probably Robbinsville. I'm going to guess there's people out there that, I've been to Robbinsville many times. I'm going to guess that there's people out there that probably still call it dope. So they would say, I want a dope and a moon pie, right? That means Coca-Cola and a moon pie. I want a Coca-Cola, right? And then some of them call it Coca-Cola, right? But so what I'm getting to is all the soft drinks were dope, right? And alcohol was dope. They would call alcohol dope. Oh, Jimmy's on that dope again. Which kind? Whiskey, moonshine. He's on white liquor, white whiskey, and they call that dope too, right? Dope has many, heroin, opium. Those are all dopes, right? And also dope, like I bought a bottle of dope the other day on eBay. It's airplane glue, right? It's a, you can look up, you want airplane glue, they call it dope, right? It's not a drug. It's just, it's a old it's an old Dutch name for, it's this, food stuff and whatever. But anyway, not to go into that, but on one of my dictionaries over here, dope, the definition for dope takes up an entire large page. Oh, is it this one? Masako handed it to me recently. It is this one, I think. Yeah, this one. You see how big this dictionary is? The definition of dope in here. This is like this is 20 edition, 20 books like this. So this is the section that has, Creole to whatever that is, Duzepri, whatever it is. I don't even know what that is. I don't know what either one of those words is. So but one starts anyway, but the definition for dope in here, it takes up an entire part of one page, an entire one of these pages. I'll show you actually, because I've got it marked. It takes up the entire page for the definition of dope. The entire page and part of the next, right? So part of the previous page, that entire page, and part of the next page is all different uses of the word dope. And that's what I'm getting to, is these dope heads inevitably think they're experts on dope because they know how to get marijuana. Wow. Or they know something about this. They know something about ecstasy, man. They're an expert. You're just a dope head. This is a huge subject. You could get a PhD in this subject and still be scratching the surface. It is massive. I mean, a huge amount of world trade. These books are on tobacco. Tobacco was called dope, right? Tobacco is called weed. I've got a whole section on tobacco that would fill up 3 of these shelves, and some in different parts of my library. I've got it, arranged in different ways for different reasons. But the point is I've been studying these. The books behind me are the ones I'm currently looking at, right? And so the tobacco, they used to in one of these books, book 2, they're talking about how the Spaniards, and this was centuries ago. They're talking about how the Spaniards were adulterating the tobacco. They're like putting like opium and stuff in the tobacco, right? You can see, these books. This is about tobacco, right? And all these marks is just me going through the book, and they talk about how the Spaniards are sophisticating, which means making it better where you'll want to smoke it more, and adulterating. Adulterating means like putting other stuff in there that's Jimson weed or something, which is datura. But they're putting other stuff in there. They would mix opium or whatever. So you're mixing cannabis with tobacco, or tobacco with cannabis. What's the difference mixing tobacco with cannabis or cannabis with tobacco, right? But what I'm getting to is this is a huge subject. It's absolutely massive. And these dope heads, that inevitably their expertise on dope exists. The limits, the bookends of that, the bookends of their knowledge are empty. There's nothing in between. This is their knowledge of dope. I got these new bookends just came in. They're pretty awesome. But
I need to order some.
Man, I constantly have to rearrange the books because of different ways. When you're studying, you have to. It's not enough to have the books. You have to have them arranged, and how you arrange them depends on. I'm constantly. I can't change the entire library. That'd take 2 weeks. But it'd take longer than that. But but you rearrange sections depending on what you're studying. Where do you put the Irish? Do you put that with famine, or do you put that with demographic warfare? Do you put that with anthropological warfare? Do you put that with migration? Do you put that with famine? What do you put that on? So Irish, what I'm getting to is these things can be arranged in many different ways. So how you arrange your library is a subject in and of itself. But anyway, I'm talking too much. This is all I do when I'm either out in the jungle somewhere, or doing crazy stuff, tracking cannibals, or off in some war, or I'm here, I'm in the books.
Well, you covered a number of fascinating topics. I guess I'll touch on some. You mentioned about volcanoes earlier. I had on some guests who mentioned about a solar minimum. I'm not an expert in this, but apparently, some people have been talking about it for years. But a solar minimum is supposed to, induce volcanic activity more. as well as have it. I assuming where it's going to be colder too. I guess there's a solar maximum, the solar minimum, and that only happens X amount of years. And then you touched on drugs, you touched on the papacy. Oh,
I just I like to I take good care of the books.
yeah.
I treat them like puppies.
I love your collection. You know, I want to start collecting books. I'm like an antiquarian. I'm really into history and all sorts of novelty things. And I'm looking at my library here off to the side of me, which I'll have to share with you, the books that I have that I've been kind of collecting, curating. And there's so much. You know, you could spend all I could spend all day at like a Barnes and Noble or going on.
Isn't it helpful to touch things though? Like when you're
Yeah.
studying different stuff, it's very helpful to be able to hold it. I don't know what it is, but like like this I don't know what I did with it. I had an opium weight here. Oh, there it is. I had an
Mm,
I've got a bunch of opium weights actually. Like it's
mm.
very this is a real opium weight that was used to measure opium. Oh, Kanjiro fell over. And
Uh-oh.
yeah, it's okay.
That was the guy who warned about the famine, right?
Famine. Yep.
Yep. I remember I remember you were talking about him. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what's he doing? Reading a book, right? And so yeah, that can here a bigger one.
Mm-hmm.
This is my brother from a different mother. I mean, he was reading books all the time. He was an autodidact. He was self-taught. When they had a big famine in Japan that was coming, he noticed it was coming, and he warned a lot of people. He saved a lot of people. A lot of other people died that didn't listen to him, but and so he became famous. So his statues are all over Japan. Kenjiro, as you can see, he's got the. Actually, my wife Masako doesn't really like this one here because he's all dressed flamboyantly, and she's like, "No, Kenjiro was never dressed like that. He was dressed, you know, he was a farmer and stuff. He
Mm-hmm.
wasn't dressed like he's going to a party, you know."
You had me thinking of, and I think it was you who had mentioned it. I was listening to you on another show. You're talking about how with the I don't know, it's Fukushima or like the water line and these old statues out there warning people, hey, don't live lower than this elevation. Otherwise, you know, there's going to be some, you know, tsunami or something that might arise. Live higher. I don't know if I'm mixing people up, but
No, you're right. Tsunami stones. Tsunami stones. Yeah. And the tsunami stones, the Japanese realize because they're as a people, they're quite as a collective, they're brilliant, right? And
mm-hmm,
they realize many things, just basics about humans. One is that we tend to forget things after 3 generations. So in 3 generations, we tend to, like the old, you know, saying, you know, the father makes the wealth and the son enjoys it, and the third generation basically goes Hunter Biden with it, you know, that and and there's a lot of truth to that. And by the fourth generation, you're like, oh, our family used to be great. Some families do last. Even, but actually, one old author, I've got that old book here somewhere, and he says the old families last not 3 oaks. But he's saying even the old families, like you and I were talking about something earlier, even the most powerful, solid families, they do also expire, right? It's like everything has an expiration date. Countries, people, families, and they are, you know, reborn in a different way, you know. And so oh, I don't know where I was going to with that, but there's on the tsunami stones in 3 generations. On cocaine and that sort of thing is true as well. I read years ago there was a Scientific American, I think it was from the early 90s, and it was talking about how famous cocaine was, or you know how popular drugs like cocaine were in the United States in the 1800s. I mean, you could go to like a general store and buy a bunch of cocaine and some whiskey and some dynamite and a rifle and your own coffin nails if you wanted to. Imagine that. Yeah. Hey, Jimmy, you want another bottle of whiskey? There's another case of dynamite just came in with the train. There you go. There you go. Go. Don't take it all. I need a little bit of it myself. You got some stumps to remove. You know what I mean? It was a wild west. And but the thing is, in the beginning, cocaine was sold as this is the best thing ever. It's against depression. It lifts your energy, drops your nervous energy, basically the cure-alls. That was the age of the cure-alls. We're still in an age of cure-alls, by the way. And and so, but people started to realize, hey, this stuff is destroying our communities. At first it was a cure-all. They're giving it to their children, and then they, next thing you know, about by 1913, or certainly by, I think 1912 or 13, I think there was a global conference on opium, and then there's another one in 1925. Global conferences, on opium, that sort of thing, and trying to get control of it. They're probably trying to get control of it to have control of it. There's different people that would want to control it for different reasons. There are people like me that want to control it because you want that crap out of here, right? And there's other people that want to control it because they just want to benefit from it and either use it as a weapon of war or just a weapon of profit and war. And so, but you can see that this Scientific American article from about the early 90s, I think, was talking about how people will tend to forget and over a few generations, and then it comes back. So the cocaine comes back. So, hey, this is great stuff. Hey, this stuff's crap. We got to get rid of this, man. Put people in prison for this. 3 generations pass. Hey, this stuff's great again. The old people didn't know anything. They're like, they were right. It's bad. It's just a cycle. And I found that Scientific American, I don't know, last year or 6 months ago, and I bought it. You can get it on eBay, and it's got that article in there, right? And so you could find, like, you could do your web search terms and find it easily, and you could find the article I'm talking about and buy it for $20 or something, and you can read what they were saying, but it's the same on a different level. It's the same pattern that the Japanese were talking about with tsunami stones, because the Japanese realize that people forget. You have this big tsunami, wipes out everybody here, and then everybody, next generation, everybody knows, don't build here. They all got destroyed. That's why we have their property, right? And then and so 3 generations, everybody's like, nah, tsunamis are a thing of the past, and now they're wiped out too, right? And that happened at Fukushima with that tsunami. There were people that built on the other side of the tsunami stone, and they're dead, right? They're actually dead. And so that, that's it. That was reported, right? So I mean, you can find stuff like that online about what happened, and there was thousands of people died in that tsunami. And so the point is those old lessons, those old people were not stupid. They make the same mistakes. They were not perfect either. They're very smart, and they're very flawed, just like today. They also made errors. They were giving laudanum to their children. They were giving Vin Mariani to their children. They were giving cocaine to their children. They were giving, and then they're like, we can't do that crap anymore. But now they do it with prescriptions. It's the same thing. Now you get people talking about, did you ever notice these school shootings, and they're inevitably on drugs or that sort of thing, or as opposed to a kid that has high energy. If when I was babysitting that young man who ended up becoming a scientist, and now he left science and now he's a successful businessman, well, he's a young boy, but the point is, if I looked at him and go, hey, there's something wrong with this kid, he can't sit still, as opposed to, keep in mind, I was that boy when I was a kid. That's why I ended up being a Green Beret. I got super high energy. I'm awake at 3 a.m. studying about, 7 Sisters of Sleep. So, you know what I mean? I'm not trying to sleep, though. I'm not trying to sleep at all. I don't need to sleep. Let me give you a hint on sleep. When your eyes go like this and you're awake, don't keep trying to sleep. Just jump out of bed and do something, man. It's like, don't lay in bed and toss and turn. Just get up, go do
Well,
something. There's stuff that needs to be done. Do it. It's like, it's,
well,
and
as a
that's
rel
the thing is when I was babysitting, I was just like, there's nothing wrong with this boy. He just needs to play fetch with the frisbee for until he's about to have a heart attack, and then we can play chess. And because he's calm, I was always into sports. The people that cause the least problems. I noticed this because I was a very serious athlete when I was young, and then I was in special forces. I noticed the people that cause the least problems are the ones who do the hardest sports, especially like contact sports, football, fighting. Like those people, unless they're on drugs or something. Now there's all these, roid rage stuff going on. But I noticed that the athletes, for instance, the football players, they weren't the ones that got in fights at school. It wasn't them. It wasn't the football. It wasn't those jocks that did hard sport. When I was a Green Beret, the Green Berets themselves, the really ones that were on A teams, didn't get into much trouble at all. It was pretty uncommon for an A team member. Now, people that were in Green Berets, you can always remember one or two guys that did something, but we're talking a lot of people, right? But when you see in the news Green Beret does something bad, it's normally actually somebody that's in the unit, like a cook. It's normally like a driver or a clerk or something like that that's just in the unit. They're not actually on one of the A teams. They never went through selection. What I'm getting to is these people with super high energy, but they get to take it out. Like, man, we were doing some hard training on a everyday basis. You know what I mean? I don't have any energy left over to go out and get in trouble. You know, there's no energy left for that. And also, you're in after you do hard sports and those sorts of things, you often end up in more of a euphoric feeling, a mild euphoria, right? So, I mean, so those guys aren't the ones that were getting in trouble all the time, is what I'm getting to. And so, if you have these high energy boys and you don't let their energy get out of them, they might go to drugs. They might go to, or they give them some prescription poison, or they go out and start doing bad stuff. You know what you need to do? Snag that kid and get him out with the gym coach and say, run him to death and then send him back. You know what I mean? Run him until he drops and then kick him and make him run a little bit more and then send him back. I mean, that's the way to do it. and the boy will grow up loving everybody that did that, because he'll have more confidence and he'll know how to handle his own self too. He'll know, hey, I can't sit still. Well, get up and go do something then, right?
100%. Yeah, that was me growing up. I remember on report cards. Yeah, he's talking and doodling, or hyperactive. Let's get this guy on this med and that med, or just I think there's something to be said about you're reminding me of, like,
He's doodling because he's bored with your class.
Yeah,
his mind is going faster than you. It's like, you know what I mean?
Oh,
Think
yeah.
about it.
Yeah, yeah, it's so funny. I don't know how it was for you, but they do the standardized testing, at the end of the year or whatever throughout the grades. And I just remember just scribbling whatever. Like I was so checked out. I was like, I don't care about any of this stuff at all. And I kind of look back and I probably should have just played the game to make my folks' lives easier. But I look back and it's like an indoctrination camp. And I think of the C students are the ones who become entrepreneurs, some say, or they become very innovative. And the B students, maybe go work in corporate America, and the A students go, government or some other. I'm being very blanket statement here, but yeah, no, it's absolutely fascinating. And you mentioned drugs. I mentioned ad nauseum in other episodes about how, I go to the gym. I don't watch TV. I go to the gym and I look at the television there between working out, and it's just this drug and here's that drug. And I can't help but think to myself, if people, I feel like if people just literally went on a walk every day, got some vitamin D, got some, make sure, got some good sleep, cleaned up their diet, maybe a little less screen time, and, maybe took some inventory of the things that are working right in their life, as opposed to fixating on what champagne problem you might have. You might not be depressed. you might not be anxious. It is crazy to me, all the drugs that they push on people. And I know you've spoken quite a bit about that, the drugs that they're pushing in different parts of the world, getting them ready for this, kind of fourth turning shift that we're seeing going on geopolitically and events. And I'd love to get your high level overview as it relates to what you're seeing out there, the latest. I mean, there's a myriad of things going on.
Right. Well, one of the major weapons is drugs, right? It's just period. I mean, that's full stop, used as a weapon. And there's nothing new. Like some of the advertisements you see might be for how to get off of drugs with a different drug, right? In this book right here, The Idol, which is very hard to come by the way, it's on opium. This book talks about that. It talks specifically about that. And they're talking about how I don't know if you're even going to be able to find this book. It took me a while to find this. This is from 1924. It's kind of rare, but they go into this. They're they are just that they'll get you're on heroin, so then they get you on morphine, and then they get you they keep you on opiates because they're the ones providing opiate. They don't want you to be unaddicted. They're just changing your addiction. And they want you to live. They want you to stay addicted, right? They want you to live as long as you've got money to keep buying their stuff, right? Or somebody will buy it for you, and it's quite, and that's what they do today. So I was talking with Masako about this like 48 hours ago, or 3 days ago now, I guess, and we were talking about this and how they do the cycle of addiction, right? You go from this one to that one to that one, and then or sometimes they want you to go deeper into the addiction, and then they bring you back out. I mean, the gateway drug thing that the dopies always go, that's a fallacy, man. It doesn't exist. Again, you're on dope. You don't know what you're talking about. That is actually part of the actual architecture of a plan to get you deeper into addiction, right? It's not, by the time anybody watching this was born, by the time your great grandparents were born, it was already very sophisticated, right? It was an art form long before any of us, before our great great grandparents were born. It was an art form to get you more addicted, right? It was an art form to get people addicted to tobacco, right? Tobacco was a big one, and tea actually, and cannabis, and all morphine, opiates of any sorts, right? And all these different things. And but so the gateway drug is actually quite real, and they, the dopies will go, no, that's a conspiracy theory, because they've been taught that it's a conspiracy theory, and they want a reason to be able to stay on the dope all the time, right? But anyway, so many people over the years have come to me with depression for whatever reason. I don't know why. I'm not a psychologist or whatever, but they'll come to me and ask me about depression. They'll say they're, depressed or whatever, because they generally see that no matter what happens, even if I'm in a bad mood one day, I'll recover from it really quickly, right? I mean, I'm like, I don't tend to get into moping for a week or something. You know what I mean? Something bad may happen. A friend gets killed or something, and I'm not happy. I'm very upset about that. But I'm not going to stay that way for the rest of my life. I'm going to come back out of it quickly. And people notice that, and they ask for advice. And I'm like, first of all, let's take me to your home. Let's look at your music. Oh, all this music must go. Elton John, goodbye, Yellow Brick Road. Yeah, goodbye. All this stuff, all this sad music, all music that's got alcohol. Hey, I met her in the bar, out, gone. All this music about, doing drugs and beating up your, gone, all this stuff. Just throw all this, give me your iPhone, get rid of music, right? And let's look at your medicine chest. No, I'm not a pharmacist, so I can't give advice. But if I were, just throw it away, right? So get rid of this crap. You got whiskey, gone. Pour it down the toilet, throw it away, gone. Just be gone, be done with it, and just go, like you said earlier, go for walks, right? And just start going for walks in the sunshine. It's absolutely magic. You got to get your sleep. You have to get your sleep. Absolutely, sleep is ultimate medicine, right? And walks, that sort of thing, and just not doing that crap. And the next thing you know, you're feeling fine. You're feeling good. And actually, as you'll start to see that everybody is smarter than they actually think that they are, except for the dope heads. They think they're smarter than they are. But a lot of people are much, and actually the dope heads too, if they'll stop doing the dope and start going for walks and getting good sleep, then they'll start to go, oh man, I was under the evil spell. And I just thought, uh, I just thought that they didn't know what they were talking about. And it turns out, well, they actually did. So, okay, learn lesson, keep going, right? Good. Now, welcome back to us, right? Welcome back to our world. You are most welcome. You've learned a lesson. And so spread that lesson, right? But the thing is when you go for these long walks, sometimes I'll just walk for weeks on end. I would go out, walk in the Himalayas, walk up the Mount Everest or whatever. I was in Nepal for a year. I'd take a break from the wars and go walk for like a month. I go walk for a week or 10 days, a month, more than a month. One time I walked 5 weeks to Mount Everest, right? I went to Mount Everest twice, not to the top, just to the bottom. But one time I started in this place called, I think it was Jiri or someplace, and I just walked and walked and walked, took a bunch of diversions, ended up at the base camp, walked back, bunch of diversions. I was just walking. And the thing is when you're walking and you don't have any music to play, and you start to put things together that are already in your mind as information, and you start to assemble them as knowledge. because you have time and you have quiet and you're just walking in the sunshine and there's another yak. Whoa, those yaks will knock you off the trail. but the those yaks, man. But what I'm getting to is you start to put things together that are already in your mind. You don't need to read any more books. You don't need to study anything more. It's like you've got a bunch of furniture that has arrived and a bunch of books, and you haven't pulled them out of the boxes yet. So you haven't arranged it yet. You haven't arranged the knowledge that, let's say, the information that you already have had into a knowledge that is useful. It's already in your mind. Everybody watching this, no matter how smart you are, you all, and you know this, you know that you know a lot of stuff, but you haven't assembled it yet. Go for walks in alone, quiet, no music, and you'll start assembling that stuff. Fasting is very helpful, actually, for whatever reason. I don't know why. A lot of the old philosophers and scientists, they would fast. They would just like not eat for a while, authors. And then there's other authors that would just go to the opium or alcohol or whatever, like idiots. But inevitably they're the ones writing these, stories with a bunch of kids on, drugged out or whatever. But anyway, I'm going on and on. But the thing is, and we're going into a period where it's going to be stressful, but you can easily get through it. You can easily get through it. You just got to be steady. It's within you, right?
Yeah, and if I might add as well, one of the things that I've been practicing is writing right before I pass out.
What
Right
is it?
before you conk out.
You're
Writing.
breaking up. What is it?
Oh, writing. And they say that if you use white paper and blue ink, your brain tends to retain that information better, especially if you are trying to condition your mind. And then writing in cursive is supposed to help you retain and connect the dots. And it's amazing how much that can be cathartic, both in the morning upon arising and before falling asleep, so to speak, as a way to ideate.
A lot of young people can't do cursive now.
I'm starting to do it again. I write in cursive because I write a lot, not like writing books, but I write like, what I'm trying to create in my life. And just traditional writing is kind of slow. So I find cursive is faster. So I'm actually relearning cursive. Plus you retain the information better. So I use blue ink, white paper.
I'm going to check out the blue ink thing. I've not heard that before. White
You should
paper,
check it out.
blue ink. Yeah,
You're
I'm
supposed
writing
to
it down right now.
Yeah, your brain is supposed to retain that information better. And walking, I do so much of that. You mentioned about challenges. I was talking to a buddy of mine, and he does well for himself, and but I can sense that there's stress on him, financial stress on him, and he's got a family, and he doesn't have the time or the mental bandwidth, so per se, to focus on other things. And I suspect that more and more people will be encountering this, as the economy continues to go the direction it's going, geopolitically, domestically here. And people need these tools. People need these tools.
I'm writing this in cursive, white paper, blue ink. I wrote it in print before. Now I'm doing it in cursive.
Yeah. There's something with cursive where you are connecting the dots, and like mental. Like apparently a lot of elite people out there, I guess even in like these different secret societies, they do everything handwritten. Their assistants, everyone else does it on the computer. I use a computer. Obviously, I'm big into computer. I love computers. But if I want to retain something or if I want to connect dots, I write. And I have anyhow.
I write a lot, actually. I take notes all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's important because you will retain it better if you, like, I'll read something in here, one of the books, and I'll just write it down. I'll write down what I just read. I'll just write it down.
Yeah.
Exactly what I read. Or I'll paraphrase it, because that way you're interacting with the book.
Oh yeah. You're all right.
Actually, can I say one thing about reading a book? Al Johnson. You okay if I talk about reading a book, how to read a book?
Feel free. Oh,
Al Johnson. I mentioned him before. He's I just talked with him yesterday. We did like a 3-hour podcast. But Al Johnson, he's got historical detective agency. You definitely want to have him on. He's absolutely brilliant. He's a former EOD officer. He did his tours over in Iraq and all that stuff. And then he and I traveled. I went to his counterterrorism training in Thailand and then Indonesia. And he used to teach Thai Army and U.S. Army and Navy and Marines and many people. And I went to his training in Indonesia and I went to his training in Thailand, right? And when I say his training, I mean, it'd be like 400 people from around the world, police and military and, that sort of stuff. And so, and he invited me, right? That's why I ended up at this. But what I'm getting to is he's also a very serious academic. I mean, he's a proper bookworm, right? And so I was with him at his home with his father and stuff over in Washington State. And his father was absolutely brilliant. I'm like, so you're the guy that created him. His father is a retired Army colonel. And unfortunately, he's passed away. But and so I, at one point, when you go to Al in his library, I realized that's like, wow, Al knows how to read a book. Al's got his own library, and he like very few people actually have sort of been taught how to read a book, right? Because there's different ways of reading, right? And there's ways that you can read. But Al, when I was with him, and so I was on a podcast with him just, I don't know, a couple months ago, and I said, when I was with you and you had all your books out there and you were interacting with your books, you were sort of living with your books, you know what I mean? The way I do, actually. And I said, wow, Al knows, but I didn't bring it up to him. But on this podcast, I said, yeah, that was when I said, it was like 8 years ago or something, or whenever it was. I said, that's when I realized you know how to read a book. And he goes, what are you talking about? I'm like, how to read a book, you didn't read the book, How to Read a Book. And I thought everybody read the book, How to Read a Book, right? There's a book called How to Read a Book. I mean, it's an old book. It's about 70 years old, maybe. And it's a great book on how to read a book. Somebody taught me when I was a kid how to read a book. There's different ways to read. Sometimes I just sort of bolt through it and that's, if you're really going to interact with a book and spend a lot of time with it, usually the best way to do the first reading is just to read through it. And if you run into words you don't know, you don't even stop. You don't look them up. You don't even waste time writing it down, right? You just read through. And then you go back. Then you start to study it. That's when you start taking notes on details. So you get a separate notebook, which I've got one of my notebooks for reading books. I just moved it out of the way. So you'll have a notebook for that book. And you'll have it like this one that I showed you here, where it has, markers all through it. You know what I mean? That's when I'm starting to interact with it more. That's the phase where I'm interacting with it more, right? Now, so, and then if you're going to go through it again, you start, discussing with the author, so to speak, even though the author may have been, passed away 200 years ago or something. But I don't write in my old books. But if it's a new book, I'll actually write in it. Like Al, he takes freaking detailed notes in his pages. I'm like, I'll spend all my time reading your notes. They're as voluminous as the page itself. But what I'm getting to is then the next stage is you start to read multiple books that are related at once because you're studying a subject. So you're looking at this guy writing about some event, and you're writing about this guy writing about it, and this guy or this woman or whatever. And you're comparing as you're going through all at once, and you start to assemble a much higher level of knowledge about that subject, right? So when I was with Al and I'm looking how he interacts with his books, I'm like, you're not a book reader, you're not like a reader that goes to, Starbucks and reads a book. You are you're a student of the world, so to speak, right? You're really interacting, and he will lay out. I had him in Panama. I brought him down, took him to the Darien Gap and through the Panama Canal and all that. Naturally, Al shows up with overweight baggage because it's filled with books. And so the next thing you know, I've got, George McMillan, George McMillan, he's a geostrategic thinker. He's a big thinker, George McMillan. I've asked George to come see me in different places like Guatemala. He came down there, I think, and Texas, and I had him down in Panama. George McMillan, man, that guy, he is unbelievable. big brains. George interacts with books the same way Al does. So I had them both in Panama. So we're in the hotel room, got a big table. So we got George McMillan, we got Al Johnson there, we got Masako, my wife, who also is a big thinker, and so we got all these books laid out, and and Al starts to do it, and here this book associates with that one, and here, and we're all looking at this basically like it. And George McMillan thinks the same way, right? But these are the guys that start putting things together and start into a knowledge, right? Not just reading a book, but actually using this as a part of an architecture of knowledge, right? And when you're developing your own, when you're being strategic about your own knowledge that you want to a knowledge that you want to build, not information, you need to be strategic about it, or start. First of all, you need the basics, speaking a language very well, at least one, right? And being able to read and write at a high level. The more languages, the better. The only two languages I'm actually good at are German and English, right? And then smatterings of others, but I wish it were more. If when I were younger, if it would have been very beneficial to have learned languages like French and Mandarin when I was younger. It would have been extremely beneficial. Now I don't have time because I'm studying other things. So that part of my foundation is actually missing. So you need a foundation first. So you start with a foundation with like mathematics and languages and that's just your foundation. Just focus on that stuff. Don't worry about the history and all that, right? Just build your foundation. And then over time, if you want to study something, let's say like war, as ambitious as war, the kinetics part is just one tiny component, actually. I mean, it's a big component when it's happening and you're in the middle of it. I mean, it's quite significant. But then there's other components, like the biggest one is information war, psychological operations, right? And information war, right? And so that's the biggest one. And to understand that, you need to understand things like this. So you're going to have to spend a lot of time looking at intoxicants. You're going to have to spend a lot of time. And I don't mean 2 months. I'm talking about strategic. You need to be looking at this year after year after year. Not always focused on it, but studying that, studying psyop, studying music. You need to study these different anthropological warfare, demographic warfare, financial warfare. Start with Creature from Jekyll Island, things like that from G. Edward Griffin, right? And so there's all these different components. You have to study geography like crazy. Geography, 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 geography. I've got globes everywhere. If you're in my home, you will not be able to look anywhere without seeing a big map or a globe, right? You just won't. I mean, they're everywhere. I mean, everywhere I look is a globe or a map, right? Here's the Erdapfel globe. This is from the 1490s. This one's a replica. It's only a couple hundred years old. There's not even any Americas on this globe, because this is from the 1490s, right? The time period of the Treaty of Tordesillas, right? So you have to study these many different topics, and then over time assemble these into a knowledge. Then you start to see, wait a minute, this is how the drugs associates with this and how that. You start to pull these things together, and then when you get with other people like Al Johnson or George McMillan or you, and you get them together, and we all get together, and then we all start to put our assembled knowledges together. Now it's even more hyper powerful, because then we start to find holes in our knowledge. And so you've built a blueprint for what do I want to know to figure out what's your end state goal, if you have one. But your end state goal may change over time, because as your knowledge increases on things, you may go, okay, like for instance, when I was young, I was deeply into physics for about 10 years. I mean, I was basically addicted to physics, right? And so, I mean, all I would read is physics. You wouldn't see all this stuff here. It would be just physics, 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 and math. That sort of, and other sciences. I also was. Why was I still into? I started with chemistry when I was like 9 or 10, and then I was like, because I thought, I want to know what truth is. Actually, it was my end state goal. I wanted to know what is the truth, right? So then I was like, chemistry's not it. Chemistry's like basically tactical. Physics, that's where the big truth is. So I spent probably 10 years. I mean, I still love physics, but I spent a lot of time studying nothing but physics. And at some point I'm like, that's a good base, but that's not. There's so much more, like information theory, and there's so much more. And mathematics clearly is not it, right? And mathematics, the mathematics that people have now is the mathematics that we use is broken anyway. The mathematicians will tell you that. I mean, it doesn't. It's not internally consistent. The mathematics that we've learned is not internally consistent. Something's wrong with it, right? And I was talking with a friend of mine in India the other day. He's in India and he's going back to the United States soon. And I said to him, I keep watching these people analyze what's happening in the Middle East with Hormuz and all these things, and they have no clue what's going on. And a lot of these guys are retired generals or colonels or whatever, and some do, some get it, but most do not have any idea what's going on. They're talking about peace talks and all this stuff as if they're serious. I'm like, listen, if you're talking about peace talks, you have no idea what's going on. You have no idea. You have to be talking about like what color are their socks or something, right? I mean, okay, well, Trump was wearing such and such color socks, and he was wearing such as. I'm like, okay, maybe those sock colors mean something, but I assure you, those peace talks mean absolutely zero. They're nothing, right? But I said to him, one of the things that you'll notice with these analysts, they'll come down to, wait, let me go back to mathematics. In mathematics, when you're trying to do some algebra problems, you need an imaginary number to make the equations balance, right? So you got all these factors and PV2 equals R squared or whatever, blah, 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 blah. And so you're trying to balance the equations, right? But for some of the equations, all the mathematicians out there, or even, people that just take, high school math, that there's the imaginary number I, right? So you need that imaginary number to make some of these equations even work, right? It's like, so you had to make up a number out of the blue, I. It's called I. It's a little lowercase I, cursive. So, okay, to make this calculation work, this one contains the imaginary number I. It's just a filler. It's basically dope. I just put that dope in there. Something's wrong with the math. Anyway, when you see people that are analyzing and they constantly say, that's stupid, he's stupid, it's incompetence, that's incompetent. I mean, don't get me wrong, there is a huge amount of incompetence out there, clearly. But at some point, it's the imaginary number, it's the imaginary factor S. To make your equation balance, they have to say Trump is stupid. Trump got fooled by Fauci because Trump is a fool, right? Or Trump got fooled. Okay, to balance this equation so that I can still worship Herr Trump, right? I have to say Fauci fooled him because he's such a fool that dude fooled him, but he didn't fool us. So, but that way we can still worship that cow, right? The holy cow of Trump, right? So, but to make the equation balance, Trump has to be lowercase f, fool. That puts in there, right? Now it balances. Yay, Trump's still the king. And so, or Trump's stupid. He made a mistake. He got us in trouble with Iran, and he's so stupid. Blah 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 blah. But so you you continuously have to throw that in there. I noticed this in 2014. I was having an open battle with the ambassador to Thailand. Her name was Christy Kinney. That was back when I had an office in Thailand. And there were times when I'm like, she's way incompetent. And then at some point, I'm like, let's audit my thinking here, because that doesn't fit the fact pattern at some point. At first, I thought, oh, she's just incompetent, or she's maybe ditzy and stupid. Actually, a U.S. commander in Philippines told me that when she was ambassador over there. But then she moved over to Thailand, and she was in my lane. And I'm like, she is really stupid. And over a period of time, I thought, wait a minute, that doesn't fit the fact pattern, because we have other ambassadors doing this in other countries, and they're doing the same patterns. So she doesn't seem that stupid, actually. So if I take that part of it out, this could be sabotage. The imaginary stupid, that S may be sabotage. And then if you experiment with that paradigm, like what's happening in the Middle East with Iran and Ukraine and so many different things, the equations readily balance. Not only do they readily balance, they're predictive. I published in writing on my Substack and other places in 2025 that I thought the Zionists, in clear words, the way I'm speaking now, not necessarily verbatim, but very close. I published on my Substack that I thought Zionists would close the Strait of Hormuz and blame Iran. That was 2025. I was putting it in clear words. I published 4 years or so before the screwworms started coming back to the United States that I thought those screwworms are coming back. Masako and I went to BASF in Germany multiple times. We went to BASF twice specifically. 14 days before Nord Stream was blown up, we were inside of BASF in Ludwigshafen, Germany, saying we think Nord Stream, something's going to happen to it. We predicted Groningen gas field. What happened to that? We successfully predicted it. We successfully predicted many way out there things, and not with shotgun predictions. And we're going, okay, we got that right. We're not cherry picking. Notice I don't make many predictions. I don't actually make many, and they're bottom up predictions. If you ask me to predict something, I'm usually going to shy away from that because those aren't where I'll get accurate predictions out of my own knowledge. I get accurate predictions out of my own knowledge from bottom up. Like I'm going for a walk, or I wake up in the morning and I'm like, the Zionists will close the Strait of Hormuz. I think that's what they'll do, just based on stuff that's hard to explain. I could never explain it in front of a jury in a court of law. It would never hold. You would shoot holes all through it and everything else. I'm like, okay, whatever, man. I'm just going to write it down. I think they're going to do it, right? I'm going to skip past all the blended reasons and the very things that are hard to articulate. But I think that, and they did it. They did it. The Strait of Hormuz is closed as we speak. And it's not Iran doing it, right? It's not Iran doing it. I said very specifically that we would likely do it and blame Iran. And I was specifically saying that China and the Zionists will be fighting over Panama, and they now are very openly fighting over Argentina, just as I predicted publicly, over and over in writing and on interviews, right? These are way out there predictions that about what's going on, but it takes years of study, years of just getting your sleep, thinking it through. Don't force. When it wells up, you can write it down, see if it passes your own sniff test. By the time I speak into this, it's already been audited by me, right? A lot, because I value keeping my reputation and actually building on it for accuracy, because over time you can become more and more accurate as you like, oh, that was wrong. That's not, I was wrong on this. I was right on this. Oh, that component seems to be right. And you start to, over time, you assemble these things. And now you've got an algorithm, or let's say a paradigm more accurately, that's accurate. But if you keep putting in the imaginary number S, stupid or incompetent, then probably something's wrong. And it's clear that this war with Iran is not about Iran. It's not about the war with Ukraine. It's not about Russia. This is global. It's a process. It's been going on for many centuries at minimum, many centuries, right? And so you can't look at this in a context of Trump or Netanyahu or whatever. When that guy's gone, things will be different. No, they won't. That guy's just a leaf on an autumn tree. That's it. When Trump falls off, he's jittering in the wind right now, right? He'll be replaced by another leaf. If you focus on every little thing that he says, that's just leaves falling off the tree. Let's say you're up in Vermont and it's, all the beautiful colors on the mountains and probably billions of leaves are falling off the tree. If you just focus on every one of those leaves, you'll waste so much time, right? Charlie Kirk, spending months and months. Look, it was clearly some sort of setup. Get past it next, right? The Trump thing at the press event. Don't spend 3 weeks focusing on that. That's a distraction. You're in a state of war. That was clearly an op. October 7th in Israel, clearly an op, right? To create casus belli to clear off Gaza, right? When you understand the larger processes of what's going on, it's amazingly obvious, right? And so what I'm getting to is most of the people that are talking about what's happening in the current war, if they're focusing on the peace talks and whatnot, just change the channel. They either don't know what's going on, or they're part of the op, or they don't know what is going on, and they're part of the op, right? And so, in any case, they're noise, and we don't have time for that because we're looking for 24 karat chunks of information, sans mud. And so, getting distracted with what Candace versus the Shapiro guy at Daily Wire say to each other, I don't care. They're irrelevant, right? They're irrelevant. Now, that Daily Wire's an op. My wife, Masako, she translated Candace Owens' book to Japanese, right? So we were at the Daily Wire over there in Nashville inside, and it was, creepy, actually. And so, I mean, because Candace used to work for them, right? So she was there for years. She was their puppet, right? She was this puppet. So am I to believe that she left and is now free? Maybe. Or maybe the game has just changed, because that's how Dusty Rhodes, the Atomic Elbow, goes from being a bad guy to the good guy, right? You know what I mean? This is a much larger, the biggest part of what's going on. Listen, all of these wars we've ever studied are about routes, resources, and ideology. Every war you've ever studied is about routes, resources, and ideology, right? And ideology is about human resources. The most important resource is human resources. It's not oil. It's not any of that stuff. It's human resources. Because with human resources, you can get the other resources, right? So a fundamental resource is human resources. So either diminishing the human resources of your enemy, like blowing up his oil, destroying his people with drugs, whatever. Anybody who's pumping drugs into us, that's our enemy. They're reducing our human resources, our cognitive abilities, our physical, just being alive, right? So human resources are the number one resource. And so these ideologies that we see are about human resources, right? What Jesuits say, we were talking about Jesuits before. Who was the famous Jesuit? Who was it that said, give me a child for the first 7 years and I'll show you the man, or something like that, right? How did that go, right? So that first 7 years, right? And actually, I had a great mother for 7 years, and she died due to medical malpractice when I was 7, actually. That's why when it comes to all this pushing these jabs and stuff, I will never find common ground with anybody who's doing that. I know what it's like to have lost my mother when I was 7 years old to that medical malpractice, right? It was the worst thing that ever happened to me in my life, by far. I had a great mother. I had an absolutely outstanding mother. And so I was with her for 7 years, right? I was very, very lucky, because that was foundational, right? And my incredible grandparents as well. So I was, foundational, very important. But, so when you see these people pushing the death jabs and whatnot, what the Jesuits say, basically the first 7 years, and I'll show you the man. My first 7 years was one with a very strong mother. Like when I was throwing rocks at the wasp, and the wasp came out and got me and stung me on the cheek, and I can assure you that hurts. And I ran to my mother crying. I must have been 5, because I know where we lived. And she's like, "Why are you crying?" A wasp stung me. Why did the wasp? I told you not to throw rocks at the wasp. She didn't know, oh, poor baby, and oh, those bad wasps. She's like, I told you not to throw rocks at the wasp. Now, the wasps have a right to defend themselves as well, and they're going to do it, right? It was no, oh, you poor baby. No, my mom was tough, man. I don't even remember I don't remember learning how to swim. My mother taught my sister and my brother and me how to swim before we could walk. I don't remember life without not being able to swim. I can swim with one hand. It's no problem. I can easily swim with one hand. Even when I was super fit in the Army with almost zero body fat and I would sink like a rock, I can swim with one hand. No problem. I can swim with one foot. No problem. Right. You could tie my hands behind my back and I can get out of the pool from the deep end with my handcuff behind my back, right? I could get out of the pool, right? I mean, I was a monster. And my mother helped develop, not a bad monster, unless you had parachuted me into Poland, I would have been bad to the Soviets, right? But very bad, until they probably killed us. But the point is that first 7 years was key, right? And they want to interrupt us. drug up the kids, right? Drug up the kids, give them these things, right? Those are our enemies. So when you study war and you look at these things and you see the world the way I see it, I'm not actually moralizing about. See, the dope heads constantly will say, "Oh, you're moralizing. Your morals are different." No, I'm not moralizing. You have become you are a zombie. You're a drug zombie. You have been captured by the enemy. Your brain has been implanted with these chemicals. In fact, you're no longer trustworthy. You can't be trusted. You can't be trusted with serious thoughts. You can't be trusted with serious things, right? You can, in fact, you can be, what you can be trusted is to service your addiction. What you can be trusted to do is to become a Hunter Biden eventually and be installed in a place, right? You can be installed and you can be manipulated with these chemicals, right? You're captured. When you look at the war, we are in a state of war. The United States has been constantly under attack and attacking others since our inception, right? And one of the major weapons that we used to get these Indians, all these books are about the Indians and many more, was firewater, whiskey. Whiskey. We didn't have B-52s. You saw the buffalo skulls that I showed you before we went online. What did I do with those things? And anyway, I must have taken them into the other room. No, it's right here. I thought that was one of the other maps. We destroyed their food supply. Those are buffalo skulls. They were shooting buffalo skulls to put the Indians in famine and to destroy their economy. That guy is standing on the top of buffalo skulls, right? We filled the Indians full of whiskey and other things, and we killed their food supply, right? It's clear that our food supply is being killed. It's obvious. It's nakedly obvious. I've been warning for 6 years about famine. It's clearly coming. And back in 2020, people were saying, "Don't you understand? The United States is the largest exporter of food in the world." And I'm like, brother, before I talk into the microphone, trust me, I understand, right? I get it. And I get it totally, right? And a lot of the biggest famines happen in places where they produce the most food. Ukraine, Henan province, China, right? That's not part of the equation. Big food exporter does not equal no famine. That does not equal that. It doesn't even appear to be related, weirdly. You know what I mean? It's just like there's so many other reasons that you'll get into famine, right? And this is by design. So they've been for generations doping up America. And I've got so many books on this. It's stunning, right? It's just like goes on and on and on. And I'll just spend hours and hours, and I'll get up at 3 in the morning and start studying, and when it's quiet and it's fascinating. But then you'll understand. I'm not actually moralizing to say that we should go after these things. I'm talking about it from a weapons. I'm talking about they're destroying us. You know what I mean? They'll take away your First and Second Amendment. First Amendment does not exist without Second Amendment. Second Amendment does not exist without First Amendment. First and Second Amendment, they are foundational to our country. And we see the Zionists now trying to take away both openly, right? Openly. I mean, Netanyahu's been open about disarming Americans. What business is it of that genocidal maniac whether Americans have freedom of speech or not? Because he wants to control us, right? And he doesn't want us to have guns. Who is he? Who is he? Cut off his guns. Cut off everything. Let them fight the Arabs that they've been treating like this. Speaking of which, let me show you something about that. I was in this Thai place last year, and these were just displays they had. They were displays, and I don't think they were actually for sale, as I recall. But look at this. This is from the. Is this backwards, or is it? Can you see it?
No, I can see it good. I can see it clearly. Yep. Time
okay.
after the bombs. What piece?
Yeah, this is January 8th, 1973. You can see it in the upper corner if it comes in right there, if it focuses. And then this one. So that's the same area. That's and here it is. This is November 19th, 1973. And So this was in a Thai store. Is it in focus? That's why I'm looking
Mm-hmm.
around the corner. See, and so you can see it's the oil thing. Breakthrough to break out. It's not. Look at this. This is 1973, right? And so I asked them in that store uh, if I can buy these because I wanted to use them. This is the first time I've ever used them. I wanted to do this, right? And I wanted to be able to show people that this is. I'm going to get a bunch of these things printed out because these are very useful, right? And you'll see that all the things that you're looking at now. Actually, let's go to the Middle East real quick. The Middle East, all those countries, not in the Middle East, but let's say in the Gulf states on the Arabian Peninsula, those are synthetic countries, right? They didn't exist. Like Percy Cox, the British guy, he and 1922, he came out with his crayon or whatever. He started drawing borders. They weren't a crayon. He knew what he was doing, and he drew. That's where if you look at pre 1922 maps, they don't have Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. It was Arabia Felix, right? They called it Happy Arabia back then, right? Yemen wasn't there. I must have missed one, right? Yeah, Qatar, right? Did I say Qatar? So Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, those guys, they weren't there. At one point, I was in the Iraq War. I was out with the British forces in Basra province. We were on the border of Iran. So we were in Iraq. And we were on the border of Iran. Iran was right there, right? Like you could hit it you could throw a rock into Iran, right? We were that from Iraq. You could throw a rock into Iran. So here I am, an American writer, and he's with the Royal Green Jackets, which is a unit that my super great grandfather fought in North Carolina in the Revolutionary War. I'm like, with any luck, my granddaddy put a ball into your granddaddy's chest. But imagine that. So I'm with the Green Jackets, who my great alter granddaddy fought in North Carolina. I'm with you guys here, and we are on the Iran-Iraq border. And there's actually bones out here in these places from the Iran-Iraq war, actually. And there's active minefields and stuff. It's dangerous out there. So we had to be very careful. Like when we would go in to create little base camps out in the desert, the EOD had to go in and clear everything, and they would clear paths for us that you don't leave these little red flags with the needles they put in the dirt, So I mean, and then we would leave in the morning and go to another place, right? But what I'm getting to is we were standing on the Iran-Iraq border. And I said, just imagine that, the deep levels of irony in this. An American writer standing on the Iran-Iraq border with a British army officer as allies. You have to have a deep understanding of history to see multiple layers of irony. It's like a sedimentary layer of irony. Like British drew that border, right, for starters. And here I am with the Royal Green Jackets, and I was with them again over in Afghanistan. But the point is it was just. But the British drew a lot of those borders, right? Not just the British, French did as well, and so they drew the borders for many of these countries. They were synthetic countries, and then of course Israel was formed in 1948. If you look at the old maps, Israel's not on there. Of course, it was Palestine, right? And none of those countries were. It was Felix Arabia, Arabia, Happy Arabia, right? It's called Felix Arabia. I've got old maps that says Felix Arabia on it. Arabia Felix, actually, and because it's in, and so and you can look online and you can buy old maps. They're kind of expensive, but you can get some, and you can find old books on it. They're old crusty yellow pages, which I've got some here. It's fascinating. But all these countries were made. Why? They were made in service to controlling routes and resources. That's why they were made. Full stop. Period. That's it. Nothing else. Iran was organic. Iran, and they called it Iran. In some old maps, they'll say Persia, but they, anyway, not to go into that, but the Aryans, that's where Iran came from, right? But the point is, Iran was organic. That was actually its own kind of formed into a country, right? Japan, where I'm at now, is organic. It formed into its own country. Poland, Hungary, they're organic. They're actually real countries, right? But many countries around the world, like all the African countries, they're all synthetic, right? None of those African countries are on any of the maps when you go back 150 years. They just weren't, or 200 years. They just weren't there. There's no map. None of the African countries, even 150. When was the first African country somebody drew a border? I don't even remember which one it was. But so all these, including the United States, including our states, they're all synthetic. They're not natural borders like the Japanese natural borders is, okay, everybody on these islands speaks Japanese and they have mostly the same culture, right? So that's an organic people and culture and language and all this stuff. But these synthetic countries, they were formed, so we would put, or the British in that case, sometimes us, and others, French would do the same stuff, and the Dutch would do the same stuff in different contexts. But they would form these places so that they could one-stop shopping. They could empower local people, and they could do, they could open ports there and do trade and get spices out or whatever, right? And so that's what, or oil in that case in the Middle East. That's what it was all about. It's just routes and resources, right? That's all. So we set like Panama is a synthetic country. I was looking at one of the maps downstairs today. I can't hold it up because it's like almost 5 feet by 4 feet, and it's an original map from 1870-71. And so my downstairs giant table, because it's the only table I can fold that out. In that map was made by Seward, Lieutenant Commander Seward. He was the one who did the Alaskan deal later, but Seward's Folly, they called it. But he was doing a reconnaissance to build the Panama Canal. But when you look on that giant map, and it's the original, I've got all the originals. I got a huge amount of original maps of all those reconnaissance of Colombia, Panama, Nicaragua, up in Mexico. And it's very detailed reconnaissance. I mean, super detailed. It's like, I must have hundreds of maps on that are originals. At least 300 or 400, I'm guessing, just Panama and Nicaragua and all that. Original studies. And Colombia did not want to play. They did not want to let us build a canal through there. Once we decided it would be Colombia and not Nicaragua and not Mexico and not Colombia and that it would be Panama. And so the Colombians didn't want to play, so we sponsored a rebellion. So on the old map that I've got unfolded downstairs, it says Republic of Colombia, where Panama is now. We sponsored a rebellion, November 3rd, 1903. It became the Republic of Panama. Then we immediately entered into an agreement with this new country, which we acknowledged its existence. We said, okay, Republic of Panama is born. You're a new country. And we immediately got into an agreement with them so that we could have a 10-mile swathe through Panama to build the canal, right? So then we started, over time, getting everybody there to speak Spanish. They can still speak Emberá and Kuna and Nobe Bogle and all those other languages, but they need to speak Spanish. And you'll see that's what these sorts of language things happen in a lot of places. Like, for instance, in the formation of Israel, you see the guy Pearl, who changed his name to Yehuda later. He made up a synthetic language because they wanted to get the Jews off of Yiddish, and so he made up a new language called Modern Hebrew, which others call it Israeli Hebrew. I've got one of his original books right here. I've been moving them around anyway, but it's called Modern Hebrew. And so the same thing happened with China. They made Modern Mandarin, right? We did it across America, getting Indians to speak English and get off Cherokee or whatever, although there's still some speakers of things like Cherokee, right? So there's so many levels of this, and it takes years of study to sort of get the feel for it, like how to surf these waves, right? What's really going on here. And that's when you look at the peace talks that are going on and you're like, nonsense. Don't even waste your time. It's absolutely not worth one moment of your time, right? That's not what's going on. There's not going to be, if there's peace talks, that's just a show for you to watch. That's it. And I see people saying fighting with Iran may resume. It's like, yeah, either you don't know what's going on or you're part of the op, or both, right? This fighting is absolutely not over, period. There is no chance this fighting is over. This is a process war. It's been going on for centuries. Israel was formed to get control of the Suez Canal. That's the only reason Israel exists, period, full stop. It is not made as a homeland for the Jews. Anybody that says that is either completely brainwashed, which would be most people, or they're part of the op, or both. In some cases, again, it's both. Uh, there's many things like this around the world. Like you'll hear almost everybody, including highly educated people, will say Formosa or Taiwan, the breakaway province of China. China just wants to reabsorb their breakaway province of Taiwan. And I say, hold on. I was on an interview recently, like a month and a half ago, maybe. They never ran the interview. It was 4 of us. So it was 3 of these super smart dudes, allegedly. And with that academic arrogance, and they're talking about Taiwan. And one of them mentioned something about it's a breakaway province China's going to get. And I said it politely. I said, Taiwan, or let's say Formosa, was never part of China. And one of the guys was like, doing the arrogant thing, because they're all Europeans and I'm American. Americans are allegedly not educated. And I'm like, actually, it never was, actually. Let me tell you how many days, and I think I did this exercise for them. How many days was Taiwan or Formosa part of China? That many days. 0. 0 days, 0 minutes, 0 seconds, period. Right? Period. They got all upset, all 3 of them. I said, okay, I'm not going to sit here and argue about it with you. I'll bet you $10,000. I said it in that way that the guy says it in the movie. $10,000. What's that movie? $1 million. I said, I bet you $10,000 that you can't prove it. And the onus of proof is on you. You've made the allegations that Taiwan or Formosa was part of China. You've made the allegation. Prove it. And don't dare send me a Wikipedia link. Right? Don't you do it. You know what I mean? And or a Perplexity or any of that other nonsense, right? And then I said, no, let's change that. $10,000. That's not good. Let's make it just 2 ounces of gold. 2 ounces of gold, because let's make this real. Let's do real stuff. We're talking real stuff here. Gold. We're not talking fiat. Let's don't talk fiat fakery. Let's talk real gold against real proof. Right? Let's do it. You guys are smart. I'm just an American. Prove it. They were never able to prove it. They didn't run the interview. And here's the thing. If Taiwan / Formosa were part of China in the past, you would not have to look. You would not be able to look over the evidence. You wouldn't have to parse it and go, well, this guy said this or that guy said that. There would be so much evidence you couldn't see over the other side of it. It would fill up this entire room. It would be amazingly, stunningly obvious that it was part of China. But it's not, because it never was. So they're always down to send me Wikipedia links. One guy on a different conversation sent me a Perplexity link. I told you don't send me a Perplexity link. And Perplexity has a bunch of citations for Wikipedia in this. And I told him, this is a very serious guy that sent me a Perplexity link. This is a separate phone call because I was on a phone call with another group of academics, and they're all convinced that Taiwan was part of China. I'm like, this is what you need to be convinced of. That's an information op. Full stop. It was never part of China. You will never be able to prove it, right? And I have offered you. Notice the form of my offer was actually a punch in the face, because I'm offering you the chance. You don't have to take the bet. You don't have to take it. But if you take it, you can find the evidence and then take the bet. And I'll pay you the 2 ounces of gold. Notice how I did that. I've done it in a way that you can only win the 2 ounces of gold or lose your reputation by digging in and not apologizing, or you don't have to apologize, but not admitting that you fell for the psyop. You either have to publicly admit, not just to me, but they never ran the interview. You either have to admit that is not true. You have never, or let's say more accurately, you've not been able to find any proof or even any evidence. All you have is all these statements here, that, and there, but you can never find an old map. I've done so much research on this. Before I talk into that, before you hear, if you ever hear me bet an ounce of gold, you better put 10 ounces of gold on it, right? Because I'm not betting something that I don't already know. I don't gamble money. I don't gamble that at all. If you see me saying, I'll bet you 2 ounces of gold, you better bet on my side because it's a loaded deck. I know the answer before I do it. I'm like one of those lawyers, never ask a question you don't know the answer to, right? But what I'm getting to is this one guy, he sent me on a separate call later, he sent me, and this is a very serious guy, and like a top tier guy, right? And I can't say his name. I wish I could, but and I said, you sent me a perplexity link, and it's citing Wikipedia links, and like most people say, they're like, don't you understand? Wikipedia cites its sources. I'm like, okay, so I was in Hong Kong with a Wikipedia editor at his home, right? At his home, he's on his keyboard editing username, password. He's in Wikipedia editing pages in front of me, right there, editing right in front of me. And so multiple times when I was at his home, so he could sit there and he could literally write an article for some major newspaper or whatever. He could write that article, hit send because he works with them, and then cite himself. And then he could write another article for somebody else. And so in other words, I can write an article right now and you can cite me in this other page and we can build an architecture of lies. Right. Yeah. And I'm like, see, there you go. I was with him at his home watching him do this. Right. I didn't watch him doing lies or anything. But what I'm saying is this is just a guy. There's no auditing. There's no auditing at all. He has carte blanche. Nobody's going to look over his shoulder to do it. He's showing me because he's bragging, right? And he's quite a character actually. And so it was amazing. So what I'm getting to is, so that's what Wikipedia is. Wikipedia is a bunch of disparate people out there with full authority to actually write an article and then cite the article or cite out however they want. And then that's going to get in perplexity and all this stuff. And then you're going to use that as evidence that Taiwan was part of China when it never, ever, ever was. So the point is, the best thing to do is when you don't know is go to safe mode and go, now that you bring it up, let me see if I can find that, right? And I should say, absence of evidence in a case like this is evidence of absence in a case like this. In a case like this, some people will say absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Well, in some cases that would be true. In this case, the absence of evidence, there would be mountains of evidence that the Chinese had Taiwan. They never did. They had a colony and a small part of it, but if anybody had a claim of it, and it wasn't China. China didn't exist. The China we're talking about now is synthetic. It's fake. It did not exist in those days. This is a fake China with a fake Mandarin. It's synthetic Mandarin. It's modern Mandarin, right? Just like modern Hebrew. Then they got the people off of Yiddish because they're trying to separate them from their past. With a new language, you can use the language for brainwashing. With the new Mandarin, you can use that for brainwashing. And they're trying to get the people to stop speaking Cantonese and to stop speaking. I was in schools in Hong Kong talking and that sort of thing. And the school teachers are like, they're trying to force our young people to speak Mandarin, and they're basically teaching us that Cantonese is for uneducated fools and and terrible people with low morals and yada yada yada. So they're getting them into modern Mandarin, which is designed. I mean, it's not the old man. It's not. It's just like Hebrew. The modern Hebrew is a language that was designed to be part of the psyop to make Israel. So the language itself is designed to keep you in that cult, right? This is not. I've got one book here that just came in. I haven't read it yet, and it's about Indian nationalism. And Macaulay was the name of the British author. Macaulay, or not author, he was a British guy, and he's trying to get control of more and more of India. India has all these different languages, and they want to have. So they made English the language de facto of India, and that became the basis. One of the main basis of their Indian nationalism was because of that. Anyway, what I'm getting to is languages like this are actually often part of the actual weapon system, right? They're actually often in different ways. And I don't mean just changing words. Like now the word dope, or let's say gay, used to mean happy. All these old books, the word gay pops up all the time. We had a gay time or whatever. And then they took the word gay or the word, rainbow, and they poisoned it, right? They poisoned these words. They poison the word gay from happy to mean, oh yeah, it's homosexual, right? They poison those intentionally so that people don't want to use them because of whatever reasons in their own context. They poison the word dope now. Dope now means good, right? Dope, oh, that's so dope. But dope in the old days was alcohol, tobacco, it was whiskey, of course, it was moonshine, it was Coca-Cola, cocaine cola, it was all these morphine, it was every sort of intoxicant you could think of and other things. But now in the new generation, dope means good. You see, they invert this. They invert. So that's at the atomic level of language warfare. That's just changing a word here and there. So that's atomic level. But now imagine you invent an entire language from the top up with dictionaries, and you get rid of all the old Yiddish. You get rid of all the old Cantonese. You burn those books. Like after World War II, the United States made a list of thousands of books to collect around Japan to get them off, to get them out of people's hands, right? And they didn't want Japanese reading those old Japanese books. They wanted to divorce Japanese from their history, right? And so that's what's happened. I picked up a book that was written in old Yiddish before, and I started reading it, and I'm like, wow, I can read a lot of this, but what I thought it was a strange German dialect because I speak German. So I'm reading it, and I'm going, oh, this is a strange dialect. I've never seen this before. So I took it to a German professor. He said, oh, no, that's Yiddish. I said, oh, I can understand a lot of it. And he said, yeah, because a component of Yiddish is actually German, right? It's German mixed with Hebrew and some other stuff sprinkled in there, I don't know. It's all kind of sprinklings in there, right? But the base of it, the broth of it is German. So I can understand the broth part, right? And so you go to Israel, and Yiddish was almost not really outlawed, I think, but it was, they tried to scrub it out. They didn't want people speaking Yiddish. They don't want them because that puts you into the Jewish train of thought, not the more train of thought that they want you in the Zionist train of thought, which is you're there for the purpose of colonization so they can control that area of the world and later to expand, right? And Masako just walked in. And so that's what's going on with the with these languages. They're fascinating. The different language levels of language warfare is something that people need to understand. You remember that song Cherokee Indian, Cherokee tribe? It's old. It was a famous song in the maybe 70s, right? So proud to live, so proud to die. They talk about you took our children and teach them your English, that sort of thing, right? Anyway, not to keep going into this, one of the missionaries, at least one that was in Japan in the old days, he was upset with Japanese language. He's like, Japanese language itself it's almost like it was, he said, like invented by Satan to resist Christianity because it didn't have the words that they needed to get them seeing their way, right? They didn't have, and even today, fewer than 1% of Japanese are Christians, right? So Japanese language, is what I'm getting to. When you're doing language warfare, and the Jesuits are deep into languages, and I've got a huge section on missionaries, languages, and things. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And I found one of the old missionary books in China, and this is from the 1920s or so, and I think 1920s, I think. And anyway, sometime around there. And so one of the sort of sand pebbles era, one of the missionaries was describing in the book how the missionaries stopped teaching the Chinese English. And they stopped teaching them English because once they taught the Chinese English, the Chinese left the monastery or whatever, and they took jobs. So they would use the missionaries as a university to teach them English so they could go use it in trade or to immigrate somewhere. And so they would leave the human architecture of the ideological human resources architecture They would lose that human resource. We teach you English and then you leave. But they were really teaching them English so they could have them in the system, and then they would leave their system. They would be in the larger system, but they wouldn't be in the system that they were trying to create at their local missionary level. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, with the Jesuits, I don't know who I had on the show, but I know one of the reasons why. I don't know who it was. I don't know if it was Johnny Cerrucci or somebody was telling me how in that movie with Liam Neeson and another gentleman where they are. I haven't seen the movie, but I guess they're like a religious. They're trying to convert the Japanese, or at least on that island, and they were being tortured. Or I don't know the whole
Silent or
details.
silence.
Yeah,
Silence, I think.
yeah, the Scorsese film. But I guess one of the takeaways that the guest I had on mentioned was what they don't tell you about is the subversive techniques to control society outside of religion that the Jesuits were initiating and enacting over there. So
It was hardcore.
trying to control that, and a lot of other European courts were aware of the infiltration. I mean, they're basically the special forces of the Vatican, from what I have gathered.
That's what I've called them as well. That's exactly what they were. They were learning the language. These are smart people. Masako and I spent more than a month down in Nagasaki because that was set in the Nagasaki area, right? In that area, because that's where the Portuguese first came, right? Was down there, and some Spanish too. And the Japanese quickly called them Nanban, Southern barbarians, because they were taking slaves. They would do. I mean, this is a period of Inquisition. They were burning people in Lisbon. I mean, they were burning people in Spain. They were doing Inquisition. They were burning people in Goa in India. They were doing Inquisition stuff, burning people. And so, then they come up. Oh, we're the victims. Professional victims are always predators. And you see that a lot of Jews are professional victims. A lot of Christians are professional victims. I was raised Christian, and that is definitely my framework of looking at the world, is through a Christian lens. I mean, Misako and I say prayers before every dinner. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I was raised in that environment. That's my base, right? But I also recognize that the professional victimhood is quite real, right? And Muslims will do it too. They're not the only ones. But there are many Christians that aren't professional victims, but you see the professional victims are always doing it in service to war, in service to conquering, right? They're doing it in service to, hey, this is for whatever reason. It's got everybody. When you look at what we were doing to the Indians, I've got entire sections on depredations of American Indians. They call them Indians. They call them depredations of Indians. All these reports to Congress. I've got some of the original reports to Congress. Many books, maybe 10 or 15 books, probably 15, about white women being kidnapped by the Indians, and savage stuff that the Indians would do. It's atrocity porn is what it is. But they would set up and go, oh, the Indians are doing this. But inevitably, where they would write these books was the next place we wanted to settle, because they had gold mines there, or we're trying to build the train through, or whatever, right? So it's land that we want. And so we have to, most of the Christian people are not going to go out and just kill a bunch of Indians for their land. Most of them are not going to do that. They're just not. In fact, I see over time, Christian missionaries are constantly defending natives against people trying to come in with intoxicants. So there's a good and the bad side. There's some side that's like, hey, we're all victims. There's another side where the Christian missionaries, they're hardcore standing against liquor to the natives, against like Formosa, this one Canadian dentist named McKay. Actually, I've got his book over there on another shelf. It's a fascinating book. I picked it up in Taiwan, actually. And he's talking about how these headhunters, actually, they're when the call them wily Chinese traders, come in with intoxicants. So McKay, he's a dentist, Canadian missionary, so he's over with the headhunters. He's basically saying the headhunters they're cannibals, but he's basically saying they're actually very good people. They're good to their children and they're good to their women, but they headhunt and they're cannibals. He's like, he's trying to reconcile this. He's like, they're actually not bad. They're just, we got to get them away from this whole headhunting part. The cannibalism just won't do. But then these wily Chinese traders come in with intoxicants, which I'm guessing was opium. He didn't say, because they were always using opium and Siam in different places. And but the missionaries were constantly in Guatemala and across the Americas. They were constantly saying, stop giving firewater to the Indians, stop giving opium to the Indians, and start, or wherever they're at around the world. Missionaries were defending them hard on that stuff, So I mean, there's a mixed bag with missionaries. There were the non-bonds, the Portuguese, that were straight up taking slaves and taking them off to places like Brazil, taking Japanese off to places like Brazil, right? Because they had colonies in Brazil and yada yada. And so they would end up in Lisbon or whatever, and next thing you know, they're off in Brazil. And anyway, but the point is the when they came to Japan, the non-bond, the Portuguese and the Spanish quickly wore out their welcome. Then came the Dutch. The Dutch were Protestant, and the Dutch just wanted to trade. So the Japanese had a small island for them called the Jima. I've been on it several times in the last 6 or 8 months, and it's down at Nagasaki, Dejima. So if you're in Nagasaki, go there. Misako and I spent more than a month in Nagasaki studying this because it's so important part of history, right? So you can see the monument to the people being crucified up there on that hill, and then there's a museum behind the monument of the Christians being crucified, and it's Jesuit. So so if you're in Nagasaki, you know where I'm talking about. That you can find it online and see the photo. So Misako and I would walk up there in the morning. So we're in the museum, and we ask if they have any private library here. And the Jesuit priest actually comes out. We waited for a while, and he shows up. So the Jesuit priest actually took us into their library. It's a nice library. And he was handing us all these books to look at. I mean, those guys, they study like crazy, especially the old Jesuits. They were very well studied people, but they were as part of the Vatican Empire or some empire, right? They were part of the routes and resources. They were human resources, right? And so even when you go to companies in America, if you want to get a job, you're going to human resources, right? I mean, it's straight up. It says it right on the door, right? I've been in many companies, human resources. But the point is that's what they were doing. But the idea in that movie Silence that they were doing that to the Christians when Commodore Perry showed up in 1853 and 1854. Of course, when you're talking about the allegations that Christians were being crucified by the Japanese had no tradition of crucifixion. And Commodore Perry says that in his report to Congress. He actually, a weird thing that happened to all of our people that came here on reconnaissance, like Commodore, I have his original reports to Congress in my other library room, right? There is original reports to Congress, and I'm reading through there. I'm like, hey, he's talking about crucifixion. I read it very closely, and I'm like, hey, look, Misako, he's saying it didn't happen. They have the Japanese basically didn't do this stuff, right? But a weird thing happened to all these military people who would come to Japan on reconnaissance, which was clearly, colonial type reconnaissance. Like when President Grant came in 1878, 1879, he had already been a general, he'd been president, he had been quite a man. He was in Japan. Commodore Perry, all these other guys, they all end up respecting Japan. All of them. You can see it in their words. Like when President Grant did his couple-year tour around the world, there only seemed to be 2 countries he actually liked in all the countries he went to. And that was Siam, which is Thailand now, and Japan. He liked Siam and Japan. He openly liked those. He liked Japan so much he stayed here, extended his trip. He loved Japan. And Commodore Perry was sent over here to do a reconnaissance to conquer Japan, right? Straight up. And the next thing you know, he's like effusive compliments to the Japanese people. He's like, these are extraordinary people. And so it's, but the missionaries, they had a heck of a time. But they still don't have much of a foothold here. When the atomic bomb went over Nagasaki, it detonated right over what's it called, Urakami Church Cathedral. I think we were in it months ago. So that was it was the biggest in this part of Asia, actually. So when the atomic bomb detonated, if it was really an atomic bomb, there's some arguments about that. I don't know. Something big happened, and it went off almost right on top of that church. I think maybe 450 meters or something. You could look it up online. I think the hypocenter, which is not the hypocenter, is where it detonated in the sky, right? So when it detonated in the sky, that church was destroyed, and it was a big Jesuit place. They still say they've got a church bell in there. I went underneath there and asked them if I could go up to the church bell, which is way up there, and they wouldn't let me go. But and so that was just months ago, actually. And so, but that was destroyed. But that was a huge, and that's been a mystery for a long time. People are like, why did we drop an atomic bomb on the biggest Christian city in Japan? The only one where Christians had, was Catholics mostly. There's Protestants too, but the Catholics had a serious. When the Dutch came at the Jima, they were Protestant and they just didn't do any proselytizing, right? But the Jesuits were total proselytizers. But in any case, after Japan opened in 1854, then they started coming more in. But what I'm getting to is that atomic bomb went off right on. So many people over time have said maybe that was, Protestants attacking the Catholics. So the Catholics didn't have a foothold in Japan after the defeat of Japan. I don't know. I don't know why it happened. I mean, all these ideas have floated around for decades, but that weapon did go off almost right, and it went off. Now, when you read about the official account, the reason that Nagasaki, I think it was a tertiary target, it was not the primary, and I think it was tertiary because the primary target was occluded by smoke. They had been doing some firebombing the day or the night before, so that when the bombers B-20 when the B-29 went over to drop the weapon on the primary target, the bombardier couldn't see the target, so I think they diverted to secondary, and there was problems, and then they went to Nagasaki, I think was the tertiary, and then they released the weapon, and so and it went, and it destroyed that church. But they still have the church and a lot of other Christian stuff. Isn't that fascinating? Because the rest of Japan had almost no Christian footprint, and we dropped an atomic bomb on those Catholics, right? On you, Christian.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened, man, but there's a lot of mysteries. I was talking with a guy you would love to interview here named Hajime Muratani. I had him here interviewing him one time, and then I was down more recently by Mount Fuji interviewing about 2 weeks ago. We haven't ran it yet, but this guy's fascinating because he studied he's a Japanese intelligence guy. So he's studied the war a lot. And he said, there's something strange about the bombings on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. One is none of those met any air defense, not ground fire. He's like, how did they get into Japan? Single B-29 on both bombings, Hiroshima first and then Nagasaki second, days later, right? How did both of them in broad daylight, clear skies, reach their targets without any fighter escort? They had no fighter escort even. No fighter escort, no nothing. Not a whole bunch of bombers, mixing up the sky. And they just went right over Hiroshima. No ground fire, the Zeros. The old Zero pilot said we could shot that thing down easy. They would shoot down reconnaissance aircraft all the time because, the Zeros could absolutely shoot those B-29s down, right? And so this is fascinating. So it just comes right in, no ground fire. And where did the bomber even come from? Now, it's said that the bombers that hit Nagasaki and Hiroshima were launched from Tinian Island. That's what I grew up studying, that they'd come from Tinian. But I don't know if that really happened. Anyway, but they probably did, but I don't know. But then on the second bombing at Nagasaki, days after Hiroshima, another B-29, broad daylight. The pilots were not even at their aircraft. They were running up a mountain nearby for exercise, away from their Zero fighter aircraft. And one of the pilots who Muratani interviewed while he was still alive, he said, we were running up a mountain that day. Why were we away from our aircraft? He's like, the idea is that somebody was deep inside the Japanese government and they cleared the path, right? That was a straight up hardcore, like serious intelligence operation to clear a path for the bomber to get in there, right? For those bombers to get in there. No fighter escort, broad daylight, easy to shoot down from ground fire or from Zeros launching up and just going and getting them. And because they never let the old Zero pilots would say we would never let a reconnaissance aircraft come in and leave alive. I mean, if we can get them, we're going to go up there and shoot them down because they're coming in to photograph targets. They're going to take that back to headquarters and they're going to design their bombing mission. And they're going to come back and so we have to shoot everything down that comes over Japan. And yet those two came in unopposed, dropped their weapons, got away, and no ground fire in either case. And it's just always been a great mystery that, and there was other parts of that that's even deeper, Bigfoot type, not Bigfoot. I mean, I think it's the more you know about World War II, the more you realize Japan. I think that their inner circles were probably very well infiltrated by U.S. intelligence, right? Almost certainly. We were taking their students for years. War Plan Orange was in the works for generations, literally generations. War Plan Orange was the plan for War Plan Orange wasn't your normal, like, hey, we have a plan to destroy Canada, a plan to destroy every little thing on Earth. As a matter of course, we have all those plans, break glass if you want to invade this place. We've already done all the studies. And War Plan Orange was an actual war plan. They're going to do it. I mean, they were doing fleet exercises for decades. They were doing since at least the 20s, planning to invade Japan. They were planning on it, right? That was part of Manifest Destiny that was leapt over to Hawaii and leapt over the sea, right? We had already raised up an army in Hawaii. Like I found one old record in when I was in Panama, going in their library. They got a library right next in Balboa. It's their old Balboa High School. So anybody that was an American who grew up in going to high school in Balboa, in the Zonians, you'll know where I'm talking about because you probably went to high school where I'm talking about, or you may have, depending on what side of the canal you're on. But there's a library there in that old high school, and it's still active. And I spent a lot of time in there. It's right beside the port that BlackRock's trying to buy on the Balboa on the Pacific side. And so I found an old book in there that has all the ship records of people coming in the 1840s and 50s and 60s, and how they're coming in from all over the world into San Francisco. So it's ship records of people coming into San Francisco, like immigrants and all this stuff. And one of the entries from about 1855, I think, is talking about how the U.S. Navy is in Hawaii, which obviously wasn't a state for another almost 100 years, and they had raised up an army. They had just done a formation. And it was saying in this entry that Lieutenant so and so, I've forgotten his name, but he was a U.S. Navy guy. He had just put in a lot of effort into getting these Hawaiians to stand in formation, and they look like a smart unit, basically, is what the entry was saying in the log. It's just fascinating because doing this, going into foreign countries and raising up an army to conquer that country and the neighbors, it's normal, absolutely normal. Keep in mind, 2 wars that I was in for 4 years, 2 in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan. I was 2 years in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. We were raising up armies in those places of the local people, because we were, eventually those would have been used to attack Iran. Because if you look at Afghanistan and Iraq, there are the bookends of, this is Afghanistan, this is Iraq, in between is Iran. You know what I mean? If you could build up armies in these two, that's a big deal. And but we failed in both, right? The Spanish, when they came over to the Philippines and all that, the Philippines is named after a Spanish king, King Philip, right? So I mean, that's where the Philippines got their name. And so, but the Spanish, they had an idea of taking the Japanese, raising an army out of the Japanese, and using that slave army to attack the Chinese. Unfortunately for the Spanish, the Japanese were smarter than the Spanish and tougher. And they're like, no, Namban, and ye shall go away. You can go conquer the Philippines and all these other places. You step foot on here and we'll make fish bait out of you, right? So, I mean, the Japanese were too advanced. They're not going to be slaves to the Nanban, right? They're not going to do it. And so, because they, no, it's like, and so, but that was a Spanish plan. A Spanish plan was to come here to Japan, raise up an army, and attack China with that army. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? When you look at this, it didn't get very far because the Japanese, Japanese versus Spanish, the Spanish get chopped up. Actually, the Portuguese and the Spanish were lucky that the Japanese were actually actually very introverted. They were very introverted because had they not been introverted, the Japanese would have fought, because the Japanese were seafaring people too. I mean, they could go very far in their ships, like over to Siam and stuff like that. They could have easily just followed the Dutch home, and or they could have easily followed the Spanish or the Portuguese home and attacked in Lisbon at the Portuguese or something. I mean, you might have suddenly had a bunch of Japanese ships off of your coast one day. It might have taken them several decades to set everything up, and because they think long term. They might have, if you're like, hey, we'll take Portugal. I mean, what would I do if I was going to do that? I would first send a bunch of spies over and all that stuff, and you would figure it out. You'd have spies in every port between here and there, and you would make your own colonies between here and there, and you would build everything up, closer and closer and closer colonies, right? That sort of thing. You would know everything that's there. And it might take 30 years, it might take 40 years, it might take 50 years, but one day we're coming into Lisbon, right? They're lucky that the Japanese weren't like that, because the Japanese would have whipped them. If the Japanese came to their home front like they did to the Russians at Port Arthur, when the Russians were like, we're going to punk out these little Japanese, and the Japanese would be like, oh no, it's going to be the opposite. The Japanese showed up at Port Arthur and spanked them hard, and beat them bad. Japanese took a lot of casualties, but the Japanese, they were nothing to be trifled with. Roosevelt loved them. I mean, the Theodore Roosevelt, he kept the Japanese in the White House. He used to do martial arts with, because Roosevelt was a physical guy. He used to like to fight and stuff and go hunting and do Roosevelt stuff. I mean, he was a man's man. He had a Japanese. He used to like Kato, I think, the Pink Panther, and but he loved the Japanese actually, and so. But what I'm getting to is Japan. Eventually, when we attacked Japan, many Americans were raised with the information paradigm that there we were hanging out in Pearl Harbor, just doing our thing, and the Japanese showed up and started, going crazy on us. And they did the same in Singapore to the British, and down in Malaysia and Australia, and in Indonesia to the Dutch, and all these different places and these various islands, and it went hardcore on them. But that's not what happened. What happened was War Plan Orange was fully in effect. We were going for it. It was decades to set this up. We had put bombers and things in Philippines. We had put all these. We did what I just described that the Japanese could have done to others if they were that sort of people. They could have done that, right? They could have absolutely gone and whipped Portugal back in Portugal. They could have done it. They could have pulled it off and had a Japanese colony there, but they didn't do it. They were very introverted. But War Plan Orange was part of Manifest Destiny. I mean, the colonialism was still hardcore in effect. Actually, one Thai prime minister, what was his name? He said maybe 50 or 60 years ago, he said Japan was the mother of independence in Asia, and she died giving birth. And it's true, because it was Japan that actually broke the Dutch back in Indonesia. That's why Jakarta is named Jakarta today. It used to be Batavia. Batavia was the Dutch sort of headquarters of colonialism in Asia, right? So it was called. So what's called Jakarta now used to be Batavia, right? But when the Japanese came in, the Japanese let the Portuguese or the Indonesians could name it whatever they wanted, so they named it Jakarta. Which anyway, that's why it's Jakarta today. But I've been to Indonesia quite a lot, and you'll see that the most popular country in Indonesia is definitely Japan. They love Japanese. In fact, they're buried in like the Indonesian Arlington. It's called the Hill of Heroes. I've been there with Al Johnson. We went there maybe twice together. I've been there twice, I think. I think I went once with Al. We went to the and it's like their Arlington. It's in Jakarta. It's called the Hill of Heroes. Japanese are buried in the most honored spot of that Muslim cemetery. We actually showed up. Al and I showed up. Imagine going to Arlington and paying off the front gate guard to be your tour guide. So we show up there, and I'm like, let's try to hire this guy. So we're like, hey, would you be our tour? So next thing you know, he's our tour guide. So we hired the gate guard. So he's our tour, because there was nobody else there. And he's giving us a tour. We didn't even ask him where to take us. He takes us right up to the front of the cemetery. And he says, this is where the Japanese are buried. We didn't say anything about Japanese or anything. We just wanted to see the Hill of Heroes, right? He goes, the Japanese are buried here. And I said, why are the Japanese buried with Muslims? And he goes, because Muslims don't usually like to be married, like Catholics don't want to be buried with Protestants, or Protestants with Catholics, or, the Jews don't want to be, they want to be separate. He said, because they're heroes. They're Japanese. I mean, Japanese were heroes after they fought the Dutch back, and they after World War II, a lot of Japanese stayed here, like 2,000, to fight the Dutch. I mean, they took those Dutch up to Siam. They took them to Thailand. They were working on the railroad, man. I've been up there actually, probably 10 times. And there's a cemetery up there. It's still very well kept, and it's got Americans and Dutch and British, I think, in that cemetery. Actually, I should know because I photographed every single tombstone, and it's thousands of them. I did that many years ago because when I go to places like this, I know how important this is historically, and it might not last forever. Like when I was in Iraq, I found British cemeteries. I photographed every single tombstone. They were broken up. Most of them were broken. There was an Iraqi guy actually defending one of them. He not defending it, but he was trying to keep it up. And he liked the British. But in any case, what I'm getting to is this is much more complex than it looks. The war between Japan and the rest of the world wasn't a war between Japan and the rest of the world. It was colonialists doing their thing. And that's what we're seeing now with Iran, what we're seeing now with Ukraine. It is the same war. These aren't separate. World War I and World War II are names that we give as if they're separate wars, or the Civil War in the United States. These are not separate wars. These are an evolutionary war that's happening, and it's happening. It's constant. It's when you start to look at it in that light, things will make a lot more sense. And if you've sufficiently studied, you'll start to be able to predict things that seem way out of the blue, and you'll be amazingly accurate years in advance. But it feels like cheating. It feels like cheating because you're like, it's not really that smart. It's not any brilliance at all. It's not. I just study all night long, in the night after night, year after year, decade after decade. I'm either off in the war, off in the jungle, off in the desert, running off over in Israel or something. I'm off over 100 countries, right, that I've been to. I've spent most of my life down here doing this stuff. And so at some point you're like, it's obvious. It's just super obvious. The war, there's no peace talks with Iran. That's just stuff. This is about controlling the world at the grand strategy level, or even above. It's about controlling the world. It's about, and part of that is about depopulation. They're using many mechanisms to depopulate, like abortion, Planned Parenthood, which is just mass murder. Obviously, they're doing death jabs, all kinds of pharma stuff, drugs that they use. Music is a major weapon in warfare. Is music, especially when you mix music with drugs. That goes hypergolic. When two things that you mix together and it goes explosive, is music and drugs. Weird things in the canyon. And so and what I'm getting to is all these. What's happening is a process, and it's well described. There's nothing new about anything going on except that we have digitals now. But the actual what's happening, the rivers flow the same way rivers have always flowed. It goes from uphill to downhill. It's like, it goes, routes and resources and ideology. And ideology is about human resources. When Al Johnson and I first went to the Kra Isthmus in Thailand in 2014, we talked about it last night. He was showing pictures of us out in the jungle and all these old World War II railways. And, when we go somewhere, we really go. Like, I spent about a year in Panama, right? Between the time, in the last 6 years, I spent about a year in Panama because I know that's going to be a future fight, right? I strongly suspected it would be used for invasion. And I think that's far from over. It's been turned off for a while, but I think you're going to see the Darien Gap used again for more invasion to the United States. Anyway, Panama Canal, obviously incredibly important, right? Who's fighting there? It's not America versus China. It's Zionists versus China. straight up. It's really obvious to those few study. It's really obvious. Argentina, same thing. That's mostly China versus Zionists, and I think the same is going to happen in Guatemala. But back to Argentina, I think you're going to end up seeing a war between Argentina and Brazil. I think you're going to see Argentina go for Malvinas, which is Falklands. That'll probably happen first. You'll probably see like data centers down in Argentina. There's a lot of. I was going to many meetings in Argentina, right? There's a lot of lithium there. There's a huge amount of energy there. There's a huge amount of ability to grow food there. A lot of Zionists are moving there down to Patagonia, right? So the Chinese are also moving hard into Argentina. Masako and I went to look at the bioceanic corridor, which goes between Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina, and Chile, right? We went on a train up in the Argentina part, actually. And but what I'm getting to is those two are going to fight there. And I think the Zionists, you saw the Zionists just went over to Beijing. You saw the Zionists showed up in Air Force One with, Trump, their little Trumpy Zionists showed up, the puppet Trump, and was led around. Xi did not meet Trump at the aircraft. Notice that, right? This thing, I cut his strings off. But so now they're all tangled up. So Trump showed up with the other, because those are Zionist puppets, Trump is, right? It's very obvious. And they showed up, and Trump and Xi didn't actually meet him. But I think what's happening is, and I've been saying this for a while, I think that the Zionists will try to put China into famine. I think they're going to try to put China into famine. And if you're going to do that, that's why I was mentioning Brazil and Malvinas and Panama and Malacca so often, right? Malacca, you're going to want to close Malacca. If you want China in famine, you need to close Hormuz, which I've been warning about for years, very publicly about Hormuz, that this situation could happen. If you close Bosphorus, Turkish Straits, Dardanelles, if you close that, close Bosphorus, you close Suez, Bab al-Mandeb, close Hormuz, close Malacca, control Panama, close probably close Danish Strait, and control Drake Passage and a few other things, right? You will easily and get a war going between Argentina and Brazil. And I think you could easily put China into famine. You'll also put Japan into famine. I think you could actually easily do it. And I think it's not difficult. It's just a matter of they're doing it in the right sequence. First, right now, they're bleeding everybody down on the energy. So people are going through their strategic reserves. Like in Japan, the energy prices aren't really that high yet. They've still got strategic reserves. A lot of the food that's out on the shelves now was produced last year, right? But I think by the end of 2027, we're going to start to see obvious famines. So I would say within another, certainly by the end of 2027, I would expect to see famines. Let's see if it comes to be I think it probably will be, maybe sooner. But if it happens in 2028, then it happens then. But I think probably late 2027, it'll be obvious. But these famines will then be used to drive HOP, human osmotic pressure. That's what I've been talking about for 6 years, right? That then they'll be able to flood through places like Darien. They'll come through places like Bahamas and Cuba and different places. They'll come all over the place. Planes, trains, automobiles, walking horses, whatever. And Europe, there's a huge amount in Northern Africa that can go straight into Europe. Right? They've already got millions that came in, right? So these are all demographic weapons. How did this even come about? Dumbing down. The dumbing of America, the dumbing of Europe, the just dumbing down. Like, these so-called academics, when I say something that's highly checkable, was Formosa/Taiwan ever part of China? And they defend it hardcore. They have no thinking hygiene. Thinking hygiene meaning you try to stick with what do I know and not know, and what do trying to stick within the bounds of logic, which we can't always do when you're in a state of war, because you have to think intuitively a lot. because we don't always have time for deduction. We just don't have time, right? You have to do inductive thinking. You have to do intuitive thinking. You have to develop that pineal gland or whatever, right? You have to really be not ESP stuff, but really your a very well nourished and well rested intuition is gold. And so, but what I'm saying with this is they have dumbed us down so much. I see people with advanced degrees on a regular basis, the type of people I deal with on a regular basis. Many are very well educated and they try hard to stay within a good thinking hygiene structure. Others don't even seem to know how to do it. When I'm saying, just show me that Taiwan was part of Formosa or Taiwan was part of China. Just show me. And again, just thinking, if you just think and go, if that was the case, there should be mountains of evidence. I shouldn't have to spend an hour or 10 hours or 3 days or 2 weeks looking for it. If you have to spend night after night after night, day after day looking for the evidence, that is evidence. That is evidence per se. I mean, if you want to find evidence of other things, it pops right out. It's easy to find. But China has never produced it. It doesn't exist. It does not exist. They were never. But again, what I'm getting to is the dumbing down process. It's been heavy and not teaching people that feelings matter more than reason. As if feelings, we should make our decisions make on feeling. They are going to lead you by the nose. That Pinocchio nose, they're going to lead them right there. You're just going to be a puppet forever. And what will happen? They will invade your country, Ireland, United States, with these people, and they will kill you, and they will then kill them, and then they'll have that land. That's how this goes. That's what I think is happening with Israel, as an example. I think that the Israelis, I know that the Israelis that are there now, they were used as useful idiots to go take that land. You can have that land, but in the end, those are stalking horses, because it's very clear that higher level thinkers are clearly genociding the Israelis too. Because the Israelis, I spent a lot of time with Israelis. I spent a lot of time with them. They are some of the most drugged up people you'll see. And if they were very serious about keeping this as a homeland, they wouldn't be doing all these LGBTQ things all the time. They wouldn't be doing like that party on October 7th that was attacked, right? That was a big. I've been to some of their parties in Thailand, rave parties down in Koh Phangan and Koh Samui and all that stuff, which they're starting to colonize now, actually, in those 3 islands, Koh Tao, Koh Phangan, Koh Samui. I've been on all 3 of those islands, but spent months down there. But those are some of the drug doingest people you've ever seen, right? If you were, and they were jabbed up, and they weren't jabbed with, people say, well, they were given saline, of course. No, they died. A lot of them have died. A lot of Israelis have died and gotten sick from that too, right? So it's not, no, they're clearly using drugs to attack the Israelis too. They smoke cannabis like Bob Marley. They look like, you can see where the Israelis are because it looks like cumulus clouds coming over their places, right? From dope smoke. Nobody who's trying to keep them strong would encourage that or say that's a great idea to run off to India after the army, which they do. I traveled with them a lot in India, and they just smoke dope like crazy, right? I traveled with Israelis a lot in Nepal and India, and in other places, but especially Nepal and India. And I liked them, actually. I spent a lot of time with them, but they treated me better than they treated the locals, and I started noticing how poorly they often treated locals, and it was like really like talking down to waitresses, talking down to taxi drivers or tuk-tuk drivers or whatever, or rickshaw drivers in India. But the tuk-tuk is Thailand, but the same thing. But what I'm getting to is I used to tell the Israelis, I would say, I am your base of support. People like me are your base of support in America. Like, it's people like me, Americans, that are like, hey, we should defend Israel. Back then, that's how I saw it back then, because that's how I was raised, right? Probably Schofield Bible or something. But the but the but the but when I was traveling with them a lot in India and Nepal, I would bring up, I would say, the way you talked with that waiter is like, people like me, your support base, we don't like that. I don't like talking down to people. If I'm going to talk down to people, it's going to be somebody that's really much bigger than me. You know what I mean? I'm never going to talk down to a waitress. I'm never going to talk down to that. Goes against every part of my culture. And I mean, I don't. If I'm attacking somebody, it's not going to be a waitress or a taxi driver. It's going to be like a president. It's going to be a general. It's going to be, you know what I mean. I'm not going to talk down about a private or to a private. And that's just like, why would you do that? Why would you talk down to a waitress habitually? And abuse the Songtao drivers in Koh Samui. Where I remember specific stuff. Songtao is those long two bench taxis. That's why they call them Songtao. It means two benches. But just I saw it, and I would talk with people in places like Thailand. Who are your best customers? Who are your worst? None of them liked Israelis. It had nothing to do with Jews. It was Israelis, right? And it's going on and on and on. It's that arrogance. It's that sense of entitlement and sense of just hardcore, unbelievable attack monkey, right? And it's always, oh, they're in a state of war. Well, a lot of people have been in a state of war for many years of their lives. A lot of people grew up. How about the Palestinians? A lot of people grew up like that, and they don't act like that all over the place. They don't act like everybody owes them something. And they're not running off from the taxi bills all the time. One guy's negotiating the price while the other four run away. You know what I mean? All that stuff. They're constantly doing stuff like that. And what I'm getting to is they have set the conditions for their own demise, and somebody's trying to get rid of them. And it's not the Arabs, them too, but the Zionists are clearly allowing these drug thing that they're like, the drugs on Israel is thick, man. You would never allow that on people that you want to keep clean. You think Singapore is going to allow that? People get angry at the Singaporeans. They're like, Singapore will hang people for minor drug events. And I walk all over Singapore. You can walk out there at midnight, and guess what? It's perfectly safe. Can I do that in Los Angeles? No, because you're thinking it's somebody's right to be a drug monkey and stab people in the throat. It's actually not cool, right? It's not cool that in the sense of your freedom, which is part of the brainwashing. They always sell this as freedom. It's my freedom, man. They always say it like that. It's my freedom. That's why I mock them. But the point is the Israelis, they have been led down a trail of destruction, both self-destruction and they've built a behavior architecture that nobody wants them around. Anyway, I'll be quiet. I've talked too much.
Well, that's interesting you bring that up because, as mentioned offline, I had a guest on by the name of Tudor Alexander, and he spoke about how, isn't it interesting how 5 years ago you could not say anything about the tiny hats, otherwise you would be absolutely censored. I mean, granted, I wasn't publishing content 5 years ago, but just obvious the obvious nature of things tells us, prior to relatively recently, you couldn't entertain certain ideas. You couldn't have a conversation about it. You'd be immediately shut down. Now we're seeing that enter the zeitgeist more and more, wherein people can talk about these things. Why is that? Why is that we're seeing people who are formerly on cable television who are now podcasters, or other people? I'm thinking of Candace or Fuentes, where it's becoming more acceptable and where you could talk about Zionism and this and the tiny hats and all that. And so he made the assertion that that they are kind of like a used fill in the blank, as you, I think that's kind of like your term, where their time has come to an end. It has served a purpose, and now we're seeing a controlled demolition of it. And he actually sees Zionism and this whole element just completely dissolving here in the coming years. And you alluded to them being kind of served served as a useful instrument, kind of like a meat shield, so to speak, for another power. And we kind of touch on that. I hear a lot of people say all roads lead to Rome. I mean, quite literally. So Who knows?
Be. It could be because there is clearly something. It's clear that the Zionists aren't the top dog, but who is? That's the mystery. Who is the man behind the curtain or the
Rome.
architecture?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I mean, obviously, I don't know, and I can't say with for certainty what is going on. I can just only, and I'll just further add that the more and more I learn and I understand, try and understand the world, the more I realize, wow, like there's just so much to know. Like, I don't know. At the end of the day, I can only just share with you what I have gathered, what I have curated, and a lot of the people that I've spoken to, again, I could be in an echo chamber, have said Rome. That is a seat of it, and I mean it's I mean without going down a real rabbit hole, that is that. And then the other camp is that it's not of this world. One side it's lizard people, and the other side it's a Christian view of dark forces.
Notice people how some people like Candace are openly going, I've jumped over to the Catholic side. I've become Catholic. And I first heard about maybe 20 years ago. Gary Sinise, the actor, Lieutenant Dan, he bought like 600 of my book, Moment of Truth in Iraq, actually, and handed them out at something in Los Angeles or something. And, but anyway, I had, but way back when it was sort of semi-public that he was, I don't know if he became Catholic, but he was like thinking about becoming Catholic type stuff, right? And I was like, well, that's strange. Why would you even just say it publicly? Because that would be kind of a private thing. I mean, you know what I mean? And then if you're Catholic, it would just kind of show anyway. And if you're, that's fine. But it just kind of felt kind of strange. And then Candace Owens and so many others. And then you heard Candace talking about Charlie Kirk when she was kind of chiding her friend Charlie Kirk. Leave the dumb Protestants. Basically, is almost. How did she say that?
Yeah.
Basically, it was something like that. And she was like, and join the, basically the winning side, the Catholics. I mean, so what's going on? You know what I mean? It's like, it's almost like the lizard people is the Zionists versus the Vatican or something. You know what I mean? I don't know, because that's, I've heard people. One time I was going down the road with a very interesting guy, pretty well-known guy, and he was having a phone call, and they were talking about lizard people. And the phone call, it was on speaker. I'm like, and these are really two interesting guys talking, actually. You would know both their names probably. And the phones ended. I'm like, what is it with this lizard people stuff? It's like it pops up all the time. And you guys are
Look,
talking about lizard people as if you're fluent in the language. I don't even know what's going on.
I came from a pretty straight-laced background, but look, I wouldn't be surprised. We
Nothing
don't
would
know.
surprise me at this point.
Nobody really knows. I mean, I think there may be some people that have a really good mental model as it relates to, hey, this is just how the world works. This is like reality. I think there's people who are pretty close to it, but by and large, most of the pundits out there, they don't know. We're just all speculating as it relates to what we're gathering and so on and so forth. So look, I mean, the universe is pretty vast. I would not be surprised. It really would not be surprise me. Um, but yeah, you mentioned the Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes, who is another person that I mean, I literally, if people are curious, at the podcast I would with Tudor Alexander, I did one with Johnny Cerrucci. I did one with a satanic ritual abuse survivor, Max Lowen. I had on Zach Hubbard, and it's interesting. Again, I don't know. I'm just sharing with you and Michael what I'm hearing from people. But yeah, I don't think the Zionists are the top dog. There might be middle management. Some of the leadership is probably involved in that, from what I've gathered. But the whistleblower stuff, if you haven't already, the SRA stuff, I mean, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. Yeah.
The ritual abuse, there's clearly, and that's old. I mean, that's like coming out of the Pinocchio book. If you read the old stuff, I mean, they had basically Pleasure Island, right? I mean, that's like Epstein Island stuff, right? In the
Code
Pinocchio
word.
book.
That's really fascinating. It's funny is I did not really make the connection to that until relatively recently. Of course, most of us had seen the cartoon or had seen the depictions of it. But yeah, no, I think it's been going on for a very long time. I know you've mentioned about, and I don't mean to have this dominate the conversation, but I know you've mentioned about a lot of missing children. How many are gone? Nobody knows what happened to them. Very, very interesting.
Huge amounts that came over the border. You know, I don't know what to think of it because, it's something we've reported on quite a lot, and with names of like huge amounts of records and like real serious records. Carlos Arella and some others came out with, I'm sorry, what's the lady's name? She's very important. Was a whistleblower. I'm sorry, my mind is running blank on her name. That's terrible. But there are some people that have very courageously come out and been whistleblowers on that. And yet, where are those children? And like in McAllen, Texas, in that old Walmart, which we've been to numerous times, and which is run by Southwest Key. And so we've been there. They won't let you in. As soon as you show up, those guards are running out there. I've got some of it on video because I've been there quite a few times. And so why doesn't the local sheriff just raid the place? I don't know why. What's going on? Everybody knows it's there. Those old rumors that they would use Walmarts as, something in the future, like prisons or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Then you
ephemera.
see, yeah, and then you see that one in McAllen. We report when I was hosting Alex Jones one time. He gave me the mic. I was hosting his show. It was weird. I mean, it was actually fun, actually. But I brought this up and with Ann Vandersteel, and she is amazing. She's just leaving South Africa. Actually, she was just down there. I think she might be on the airplane right now. And then Gary Haven came on with us. Doc Chambers came on with us. Pete Chambers, he's pretty amazing. He ran for governor in Texas. He didn't make it, but he had a lot of support. He didn't have the tens of millions of dollars behind him that the globalist Greg Abbott had, and that sort of thing. But anyway, we all have been there. Like Doc Chambers has been there to keep Southwest Key at that Walmart. We were there together, and Ann Vandersteel's been there. Anthony Rubin. Good Lord. A lot of serious people have come there to look. Anthony, have you ever had Anthony Rubin on your show?
No, I haven't.
Anthony Rubin, he's something to keep an eye on because Anthony, I just messaged him a couple nights ago. I said, you're building such a foundational base of knowledge that it's going to be extremely useful and valuable in so many ways in the future that is you can't even imagine right now, because he's been traveling. I took him down to the Darien Gap, we went all over the border together. We went over most of the U.S. border together, from Texas over to San Diego and other places. Then he met us in Guatemala and all this sort of stuff. He got kidnapped in Mexico. It's unbelievable. So Anthony's always out there in the middle of stuff. He's been off to Africa studying this, got in migrants attacked him and his brother Josh in front of the Eiffel Tower, bloodied up. Josh bleeding down his head. They were sending me photos from the police station. Josh has all got, looks like he's been shot, because head wounds, you get a little cut and it looks like you've been shot like Kennedy or something. But in reality, it's just a little cut. But I mean, they went all over America knocking on doors. They had records of where the migrants had gone to. And Anthony was doing that with Carlos Arella. They said that they had almost every home that they knocked on, which was hundreds, as I recall, almost every one of them had newborn children, had young children that they had since they got to America. That's the kind of work that Anthony's doing. He got kidnapped in Mexico, right by SpaceX on the Mexican side. I was tracking his icon, right? And I'm like, his icon's gone off, the route that we had planned. And anyway, so he got kidnapped and they destroyed his gear, and they had killed some Americans right there in that same spot the year before. You can see that in the news. What does Anthony do when he gets released? They had him on their knees out there, and I could see the icon. They didn't find the tracker. And so the Anthony's back. He got released back, and the Border Patrol took him in, took statements, FBI and all that stuff. Anthony went right back to like a Best Buy or something, bought new camera gear, went straight back to Mexico. That's Anthony. I love that guy. He is building such a base of knowledge that on this firsthand stuff, just going everywhere. And I think he would be a very important person for you to talk with, because he's on the ground, but he also hits the books. He's a book monkey too, right? So he loves the books, and he's on the ground. I mean, he's out there. And so he's the one that kept telling me I need to read Creature from Jekyll Island. He told me like 20 times, and I finally read it, and I was like, why didn't I read this before? Now G. Edward Griffin called me up one time, and or actually we've talked quite a few times now. Sometimes I just call him up. He's the author of Creature from Jekyll Island, and I said, I can't believe I didn't read this when I was like 20 or something. Well, I was in the army then. I probably wouldn't have read it then. But when I was either a teenager or after the army, that everybody should read Creature from Jekyll Island. Everybody should read that book. Actually, it's probably better to read it when you're maybe mid 20s, or I mean, unless you have a good understanding of some other stuff first, because it's helpful to or you can read it when you're young and then read it again as years go by, and then you'll see more components of it that are. But anyway, what I'm getting to is Anthony. Sorry, the wind is blowing and it's knocking over this map. The Anthony, I'll introduce you if you want to, but Anthony Rubin, I can't say where he's at right now, but he's in one of those dangerous places right now. And that guy, him and his brother Josh, they are something else. They are going to be people to keep your eyes on. He's very anti-drug too, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to connect with him. That is absolutely fascinating. There was something I was going to comment on to you. I'm blanking out what I was going to say, but yeah, I absolutely would love to connect. It's a very.
I introduced him to Tucker, and he went on Tucker. He went on with Alex Jones many times. Many, not just those guys, but many people want him on. Once you have him on once, you'll want him on more, because he's special and he's young. He's still in his like late 20s now, maybe 28ish or something. And yeah. So that's why I tell him, I'm like, man, just keep doing what you're doing. And when you're home back in the United States, hit those books. Hit the book. He already does that. You don't need to tell him. But I just want to encourage, because I can see the potential in him is quite extreme. Yeah.
Unbelievable. There's so much you can derive from old works. That's something that I need to start purchasing. It's amazing what you can find on eBay or different websites. But Michael, is there anything else you'd like to share? And also, how can people learn more about you and support your work?
Oh, just how long did we go?
Almost 3 hours.
Whoa. And all right. So, oh well, I'm on Substack at Michael Yon, and I'm on X at Michael Yon Big Honey. So I'm on Substack and on X. And now I'm about to go with Masako, my wife, the long-haired general, and we're going to read Pinocchio. I've been reading Pinocchio out loud with Masako. We study together a lot, and she studies information war and brainwashing as well, and all these other components. So when we're reading this together, she sees things that I don't see, and so it's not. So we'll like read a paragraph and then discuss it. It's another way of reading a book. How to read a book. Read a book and do it. I mean, it's very important. Read and to go and to teach. Teaching is important because you'll learn a lot when you teach. And what good is learning it if you don't teach it? You know what I mean? The end state is you need to either be a teacher or a doer, or preferably both.
Absolutely. Michael, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for making the time and for doing what you do. And Masako, thank you for helping to make this happen as well. Being involved, being an encouragement and other means for Michael. And be well. And I know we will be in touch. And you take care.
Thanks, Christian. Talk with you later.
Likewise.